If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 41, Rushing the Path. 10 minutes later, Cain, along with his Murkrow and Slowpoke, set off again to complete the mission. Holding a dagger in hand, Cain walked through the forest, comparing his surroundings with the marks on the map. If he wanted to keep searching for the mission items, the first thing he had to do was return to the path drawn on the map. Murkrow hovered above Cain's head, constantly watching the surroundings. In a forest as dangerous as this, the limited detection range of the system wasn't enough to respond to unexpected situations. Slowpoke closely followed Cain, its eyes glowing with a blue shimmer. Under the effect of telekinesis, Slowpoke, usually slow, could now keep up with Cain's pace. After learning the lesson from the encounter with Golduck, Murkrow, as Cain's first line of defense, was able to spot enemies and attack them before they could approach Cain, neutralizing the threat. If an enemy was strong enough to break through Murkrow's defense, it didn't matter, as Slowpoke, closely following Cain, served as the second line of defense. Slowpoke could use its psychic power to control an enemy once it got past Murkrow, and with Murkrow's help, quickly defeat it. Even if an attacking Pokémon was extremely powerful, and Murkrow and Slowpoke couldn't defeat it together, Slowpoke had the ultimate resource of using teleport to ensure everyone's safety. Perhaps due to the intense battle between Gyarados and Melodic the day before, today in the forest near the lake, wild Pokémon were scarce. Thus, Cain walked for almost an hour without encountering any powerful Pokémon. Gradually, the distance from the waterfall increased, and the humidity in the air became less dense. As they progressed, more Pokémon began to appear in the forest. According to the map, if they continued at this pace, in an hour they would return to the marked path. After cutting a vine blocking the way, an animal trail hidden behind it was revealed. Walking along an animal trail, though with more chances of encountering Pokémon, was easier than pushing through branches and bushes. Cain didn't hesitate and began walking along the trail. Now, with the dual protection of Murkrow and Slowpoke, safety was almost guaranteed. Even if they couldn't win a battle, they could always flee. As expected, it wasn't long before a battle occurred. Maybe due to his earlier luck, things weren't going so well now, or perhaps it was because he was walking along the animal trail. Several wild Pokémon attacked Cain one after another. Though none of them were high level, under the protection of Murkrow and Slowpoke, none managed to get close to Cain. In fact, few managed to surpass Murkrow's first line of defense. In the forest battle, Murkrow moved as freely as a dragon in the sea, and its body, increasingly accustomed to the weight load, was also getting faster. Now, carrying 5 kilograms of weight, its speed almost matched what it had initially. It quickly moved between trees, toying with its enemies. For instance, the Mankey Murkrow had just taken down tried to use its ability to move quickly between trees to attack Cain, but was discovered by Murkrow the instant it tried. Under the flying type advantage over fighting type, this level 19 Mankey was defeated in a single wing attack from Murkrow. This was just one of many attempted attacks, but in all cases, the fate of the Pokémon trying to ambush Cain was the same. Cain showed no mercy, and all Pokémon that attacked were eliminated by Murkrow and Slowpoke. In this forest where only the strongest survive, the lack of mercy sent a clear message to the other Pokémon. Each time one of these standout Pokémon fell, no others dared to attack for a while until Cain left the area. Upon reaching a new area, other Pokémon would start attacking again. Since the Golduck incident, Murkrow and Slowpoke had been ruthless with each Pokémon daring to attack them, venting their frustration on them. However, as they eliminated more Pokémon, Murkrow and Slowpoke's aura of danger increased, and fewer Pokémon dared to attack them. Many who initially intended to attack were intimidated by the bloodlust they emanated. The 1-hour stretch of road took them almost 2 hours due to the number of attacks they faced. Though annoying, the progress was evident. Murkrow leveled up once more, reaching level 18, and though Slowpoke didn't level up, its mastery over its moves improved significantly. It also became more familiar with battling under its trainer's orders. If today's Slowpoke faced the Murkrow from when it was captured, the capture wouldn't have been as easy, even though Murkrow, as a Dark-type Pokémon, has an advantage over Slowpoke's Psychic type. In just 2 hours, Slowpoke not only improved its Psychic move mastery but also increased its Water-type move proficiency. The most important thing is that Slowpoke started learning its own battle rhythm, able to react quickly to attacks. Finally, they returned to the path. Initially, Cain had fled from the Raticate to the waterfall, where he encountered Slowpoke and ultimately captured it. You could say it was fate. After a brief reflection, Cain said, "We're finally back on the path, but it took longer than I expected." A bit resigned, he added, "Let's take a break and prepare some lunch, and we'll continue later." He chose a relatively flat spot under a tree, gathered some dry branches and leaves, and lit a small fire. Finally, Cain took out 2 of the 4 rabbits he had caught on the way from his Team Rocket belt, along with salt, pepper and other spices he had specially bought. Skillfully, Cain skinned the rabbits with his dagger, removed their guts, and with Slowpoke's help, cleaned them with water. Soon, the rabbits, previously covered in fur, were transformed into juicy pieces of meat. Before long, Cain, after carefully roasting them, had before him 4 golden, crispy pieces of rabbit meat, and Murkrow and Slowpoke, tired from the morning battles, were already beside him, eagerly watching the golden, juicy meat. Though it was better for Murkrow to feed on poke blocks, which also tasted great, it couldn't resist Cain's excellent roasting skills, so it always ate roasted meat before supplementing with poke blocks. Slowpoke, after tasting Cain's roasted fish for the first time, couldn't forget that flavor, and now, seeing what seemed like even more delicious rabbit meat, waited eagerly. Cain smiled, using the dagger to cut one of the pieces of meat and eat it, leaving another on Murkrow's plate, and giving the other 2½ to Slowpoke. Slowpoke's appetite was much larger than Murkrow's, and only with 2½ pieces of rabbit meat could it feel barely satisfied. Cain saved the rest for later, gathering berries from the trees as they walked and eating them along the way. Well, time to eat. After serving the food, neither Murkrow nor Slowpoke moved until Cain gave the order, and only then did they start eating quickly. Murkrow was the first to finish and glanced at Slowpoke's plate, where some meat remained, before returning to its poke blocks. Slowpoke wanted to share a bit with Murkrow, but seeing its refusal, decided to finish it alone. Soon, lunchtime ended. Some wild Pokémon were attracted by the smell, but seeing Murkrow and Slowpoke and sensing the bloodthirsty aura surrounding them, they decided to move away. After the meal, Cain took out the map. Now that they were back on the original path, though the distance seemed like a day, considering the encounters with Pokémon and the fact that as they progressed, the Pokémon would be stronger and the path more difficult, he calculated it would take 2 days. But with Murkrow and Slowpoke once again in full form after a midday rest and lunch, the trio set off once more, into the depths of the forest. Shortly after they left, a group of people appeared at the spot where Cain had just roasted his meal. The group's leader, a man with a slender, white hand and a malicious smile, approached the ashes left behind, extending his hand and touching the warm ashes, then bringing them to his nose and sniffing. Turning his back to his companions, he wore a grim smile and murmured, "What a coincidence, Cain." He spoke the last 2 words through gritted teeth. One of the men behind him, noticing his actions, stepped forward and touched his shoulder. "Have you found something, Saurus?" Chapter 42, Discovery. His expression shifted from grim to cheerful in an instant, showing a very friendly smile. He turned to that person and said, "Oh, it's nothing, I just discovered someone quite dangerous." Upon hearing this, the person's expression changed slightly. "Someone? Do you know him?" It's worth noting that finding someone on this vast trial island is no easy task. Even if participants enter the forest, most return the same day. Being this far from the base means it's not a one-day round trip. Therefore, if someone can survive alone in the wild, they're definitely not to be underestimated. Additionally, according to what Saurus said, this person is dangerous, which means he likely knows him. Saurus gradually stopped smiling and nodded seriously. Yes, he's the first place in the trial, who wouldn't know him? The person he was speaking to also became serious. Although his impression of Cain was based solely on that calm expression after taking first place, he felt a slight apprehension toward someone who could surpass Xander. Saurus's expression turned solemn, very different from the smile he showed others. With the person in front of him, there was no reason to hide anything. As someone who had grown up with Saurus, this person knew him well. Even back at the base, Saurus managed to create a small yet influential force thanks to his help. Thus, as the one who knew him best, upon seeing Saurus's expression, his face changed drastically. "Don't tell me you plan to attack him, right? And how can you be sure it's him?" After all, everyone knew this guy wasn't afraid to challenge Xander, someone clearly different from the rest, probably with connections in Team Rocket. And yet, this same guy was beaten by Cain, coming in second, and all he did was throw a few empty threats. There was no reason to hide it. With the corner of his eye, Saurus glanced at the group chatting amongst themselves, nodded, and said, "Sky, don't you find it surprising that a commoner like him could surpass Xander? He must have had some kind of fortuitous encounter, or his Pokémon has extremely high potential." Saurus looked at Sky and continued, "I watched him before he left, saw him go in this direction. Do you think I chose this mission at random?" With a dark face, Sky couldn't help feeling a slight twitch in his eye. Although Saurus had valid reasons, Sky knew the real motivation was that Cain had ignored Saurus's invitation last time, hurting his pride. However, Sky was smart enough not to say it out loud, and he had to admit Saurus was right. If they could uncover Cain's secret, he, too, might achieve a position in the top 10. Sky's eyes gleamed, reflecting his inner turmoil. If it hadn't been for his bad luck in receiving a low-potential Pokémon, he wouldn't have had to help Saurus climb the ranks, depending on him to have any influence at the base. To be honest, apart from Saurus's dazzling smile and his fairly strong coughing, Sky considered himself superior in every other aspect. However, circumstances forced him to lean on Saurus if he wanted to stand out in the trials. He had to admit that the Pokémon distribution by Team Rocket, except for Xander, was entirely random. Whether one received a high-potential Pokémon or not depended solely on luck. Saurus didn't notice Sky's hidden thoughts, busy fantasizing that if he discovered Cain's secret, he could become first in the trials and secure a prominent position in Team Rocket, standing above everyone else. "But we're not sure we can beat him," Sky commented with respect for the first place. After all, he himself was only in the 20s in the ranking, a big difference. "Don't worry, we won't know how strong he is until we try. And if we can't beat him, we'll still have others covering our backs," Saurus replied, glancing toward the group of 5 people accompanying them. Shortly after, the two exchanged looks and made the decision to test Cain's abilities. He quickly changed expressions, putting on his characteristic smile, and turned to the 5 behind him. Those discussing Pokémon stopped talking and looked at Saurus when he turned toward them. There was no denying Saurus knew how to present himself effectively. Pleased to have everyone's attention, Saurus smiled and said, "I just discovered a great opportunity. If we seize it, we can all pass the trial without any issues." Upon hearing this, the eyes of the 5 lit up immediately. Although they were relatively strong, securing their place in the trial was a bit uncertain. If there was a chance to guarantee it, they had to seize it. Although they didn't doubt Saurus's words, someone still wanted to be sure. "Really, Brother Saurus?" Saurus looked at the one who asked, smiling and nodding. "That's right. I just confirmed it with his brother, Sky." Everyone turned their gaze to Sky, who looked at them one by one and nodded to confirm. With confirmation from both leaders, the 5 were encouraged. The 50 spots in the Team Rocket final trial had always weighed on their minds. If they could pass with their own ability, they wouldn't need to rely on anyone else. After all, living in someone's shadow wasn't easy. Seeing the confidence in the others' eyes, Saurus and Sky smiled internally. "When the time comes, follow my orders without any hesitation or delay. If I see anything, we won't include you again, and you'll have to fend for yourselves," Sky warned, taking on the role of the bad cop in the group. The others felt a slight fear in their hearts. No one wanted to lose an ally, as it would make life much harder at the base. They quickly nodded, indicating they understood. "If you have any doubts, wait until everything is over to ask. Don't make everyone suffer," Sky continued, warning. If they knew their opponent was the first place, Cain, they might desert at the last minute, so Sky made sure to prepare them. Everyone nodded again. At that moment, Saurus stepped forward and smiled. "Don't worry, I'll handle everything. If we face danger, I'll stay behind to cover the retreat." His smile and confidence reassured the 5 a bit. After all, they trusted Saurus's actions thus far. However, when they weren't looking, a cold expression crossed Sky's eyes. He knew Saurus's true intentions well. "All right, let's go as soon as possible. The warmth of the ashes suggests he's not far. If we hurry, we'll catch up to him," Sky said, hiding his displeasure behind a smile. Saurus didn't suspect a thing, nodded, and raised his hand for everyone to quickly move in the indicated direction. Elsewhere, Cain walked at a steady pace through the forest, unaware that someone had ill intentions toward him, nor that the ashes he'd left behind had revealed his location. In reality, even if Cain knew, he wouldn't worry. Had this happened before capturing Slowpoke, he might have avoided confrontation due to the number of opponents. But now that he had Slowpoke, he could challenge any participant from the base. Slowpoke, use Confusion to control Meowth. Murkrow, use Screech and then finish it off with Wing Attack, Cain ordered calmly, watching as a wild Meowth fell under the combined attacks of Murkrow and Slowpoke, lying on the ground like a corpse. That level 20 orange quality Meowth had tried to take advantage of its speed to attack Cain, who appeared vulnerable. But before it could approach within 3 meters, it was stopped by Slowpoke's Confusion move. When it tried to escape, it was caught by Confusion again, and Murkrow used Screech to lower its defense before finishing it with a wing attack. This was the battle method Murkrow and Slowpoke had perfected. Slowpoke would use its powerful Confusion to immobilize the opponent, while Murkrow would weaken and finish them off. Few Pokémon could withstand this type of combined attack. The Meowth on the ground was just one of many Pokémon they had defeated along the way. Murkrow, Slowpoke, good job, Cain praised his Pokémon without holding back on compliments. That said, he took a mid-level Poke Block from his belt and gave it to Murkrow to restore its energy. Slowpoke, on the other hand, still only 8 yellow berry Poke Blocks, so it didn't receive one. Luckily, Slowpoke mainly consumed psychic energy, so with a little use of the Calm Mind move, it could quickly recover. The training goal Cain set for Slowpoke was to be able to restore its psychic energy through Calm Mind while walking, just as Murkrow maintained its Tailwind state at all times. Yadan, suddenly, Slowpoke tugged on Cain's pant leg and made a sound. Craw, Murkrow also flew toward Cain and cawed softly. Seeing his two Pokémon's reaction, Cain felt slight concern. With the help of Slowpoke and Murkrow, Cain finally understood what they meant. Are you saying someone is following us? Cain narrowed his eyes, his gaze sharpening. Through Murkrow and Slowpoke's gestures, Cain realized it wasn't just one person following him. In this forest, apart from participants, there shouldn't be any other humans. Chapter 43, The Hunt Begins. It seems I haven't asserted my authority. Everyone wants to test my limits, hey. Cain's face grew dark, a fierce killing intent flashing in his eyes. Since they want to measure my strength, I'll make them see just how great the gap truly is. Suppressing his intent to kill, Cain signaled his Pokémon, Murkrow and Slowpoke, to act normally but stay alert. I wonder who it could be? Xander. Although his face remained emotionless, Cain couldn't help but speculate on who it might be. Thinking of Xander, Cain couldn't resist a slight smile. If Xander were so petty, he wouldn't have kept him beneath him in the past life. Or could it be him? A certain figure flashed in Cain's mind. At the base, besides Xander, whom he had clashed with, there was only one other person, Saurus. Moreover, Saurus was someone who, despite his sunny facade, had a petty heart. Confirming his suspicion, Cain was now 90% sure. Following his original route, Cain avoided drawing Saurus and his group's attention, who trailed closely behind. To follow him undetected, they kept a significant distance. Deliberately, Cain led Murkrow and Slowpoke down an overgrown path, gradually moving off the main trail. The followers suspected nothing, with some impatiently suggesting to Saurus that they strike immediately, taking advantage of Cain's supposed unawareness. What they didn't know was that the person they planned to attack was the top rank in the trials. If they knew, they'd probably reconsider their aggressive stance. Once Cain reached an ideal location, he stopped abruptly and told Slowpoke, "Slowpoke, teleport us back to where we were before." As soon as Cain finished speaking, Slowpoke's eyes, already prepared, glowed with a blue light. Using its psychic power, it surrounded Cain and Murkrow, and in the blink of an eye, they vanished. Saurus and his group, who had been following from afar, lost sight of Cain. To avoid detection, they had only been tracking his footprints. However, when they cautiously reached the spot where Cain had disappeared, the footprints stopped. Saurus and Sky paled simultaneously. "Damn it, he vanished," said Sky, staring at the last of Cain's tracks. Since Slowpoke always floated using its psychic power, it left no tracks on the ground. Moreover, they had no idea Cain had captured a new Pokémon. To them, the best strategy in the trial was to focus on training a single Pokémon. Spreading resources to train others would be a recipe for disaster. "He found out we were following him," Saurus said, his expression turning serious. Vanishing abruptly could only mean one thing: Cain had realized he was being followed. Thinking of the devastating power of Cain's Murkrow, Saurus's expression darkened further. He motioned for his coughing to stay close, ensuring his own safety. "What's going on, Brother Saurus?" One of the five trailing them asked, noticing the change in the situation. Saurus looked at him without answering. Sky, with a somewhat alarmed expression, explained, "We've lost him." The man seemed somewhat relieved, though. Losing track wasn't a big deal, with careful searching, they could find him again. Saurus and Sky didn't want to go into more detail. If Cain had only discovered he was being followed and decided to flee, there'd be no problem. But they feared Cain wasn't someone who'd accept provocation without a fight. They could only hope Cain would see their numbers and wouldn't dare to confront them. Meanwhile, Cain reappeared where he had first detected his followers. Imagining the frustration on their faces upon reaching the spot where he'd vanished, a cold smile crossed his lips. From now on, the roles of hunter and prey will be reversed. Using numerical superiority is usually effective, but Cain wasn't an ordinary person. In his past life, he'd learned an important lesson: in the presence of overwhelming force, the number of combatants doesn't determine victory, especially when one holds the advantage and the initiative. Aside from Saurus, the others were merely people who had never seen real bloodshed. Over the past few weeks on the trial island, not only had his Pokémon improved tremendously, but Cain had also reaped many benefits. While his Pokémon trained, Cain also strengthened himself. Now, his physical condition was far better than when he arrived on the island. In this Pokémon world, human constitutions are far more robust than those on Earth, and growth is faster. After weeks of intense training and a proper diet, Cain had drastically improved his physical condition. Although he didn't have a muscular build, compared to Saurus and his group, who lived comfortably at the Team Rocket base, Cain surpassed them not only in Pokémon strength but also in physical condition. Now that the hunt had begun, he would show no mercy. With his knowledge of the forest, something Saurus and his group couldn't even imagine, Cain moved like a leopard, gliding swiftly between trees and underbrush. What would be an obstacle for others was merely a fence for him. He quickly closed in on Saurus's group. If he moved fast enough, they'd still be in the dense foliage where the grass grew tall. If he hid well, he could attack and seize the upper hand. Saurus and his group's Pokémon were mainly Team Rocket classics: Saurus's Coughing, Skyzakans, and Pokémon like Rattata, Zubat, and Oddish for the other 5. Though their Pokémon weren't strong individually, together they could form a considerable force. Cain knew their capabilities well, but they only had a shallow understanding of Cain's power. Blindly seeking trouble with confidence, it's undeniable that greed can cloud judgment. To track Cain's whereabouts, the group dispersed slightly through the foliage. Sky reminded them that they could spread out a bit but had to keep communication at all times. However, in doing so, their numerical advantage disappeared, giving Cain the chance to take them down one by one. Cain's field skills far exceeded theirs. As he neared the foliage, none of them noticed. He drew the dagger kept at his Team Rocket belt, holding it in a reverse grip. Glancing at Murkrow and Slowpoke, who had hidden nearby, he said, "Get ready, we're starting the hunt." Chapter 44, Weakness is the Original Sin. The two Pokémon had been with Cain long enough to understand his intentions. They nodded to indicate their understanding. In an instant, their bodies moved like arrows, swiftly cutting through the person-high grass. Their feet emitted a faint glow, touching the ground soundlessly, all thanks to Slowpoke's psychic control as it followed closely beside him. Murkrow stayed flying low, just above the height of the grass, allowing it to avoid detection while searching for nearby people. Slowpoke also extended its psychic energy to search for silhouettes in the grass. The first person Cain encountered was one of the 5 following Saurus. This person, too focused on tracking Cain to seize the opportunity Saurus had promised, had slowly drifted away from the group. He thought that, given their numbers, even if they lost sight of their target, the target wouldn't dare counterattack. Although he wasn't wrong: if an ordinary person knew these 7 were after him, he would have already fled. But this wasn't just anyone, this was Cain. However, the person wasn't entirely defenseless, as his Rattata was close by in case a wild Pokémon suddenly appeared. Upon detecting his trace, Cain didn't hesitate and quickly approached, ordering Slowpoke to use its psychic power to immobilize both the man and his Pokémon. Murkrow acted swiftly, transforming into a dark shadow that slid through the grass, its wings glowing with a white light as it launched an attack infused with flying-type energy. The startled Rattata was attacked and eliminated immediately. It was merely a poorly raised, low-level Rattata, even weaker than some wild Pokémon, and was instantly defeated by Murkrow's move. The man, his eyes wide open, witnessed his Pokémon's death, but due to Slowpoke's psychic control, he couldn't make a sound. Only upon seeing Cain's figure did he realize that the person they had sought to confront was this ruthless rival who had placed Xander in second place. His eyes filled with pleading as he let out a strangled sound. Cain ignored him, sliding his dagger across his throat. The man died without understanding how Cain had approached or how he had been paralyzed on the spot. Cain wiped the dagger on the man's clothes, took his belt, and stored it in his storage space, then disappeared back into the grass. It was all swift and clean, like a professional assassin. I didn't intend to confront you, but you volunteered. If you want to kill, you should be prepared to die, Cain murmured as he ran, his eyes flashing with a dangerous light. In the end, he had never shown his true fangs to the other participants in the trial. This time, he would become their nightmare, if they still had the chance to dream. Only dead enemies are the best enemies. If you decide to attack, show no mercy. Cain, who had always held to this principle, would not show mercy due to weakness. Weakness is the original sin. In just 5 minutes, Cain silently eliminated 2 more people. Although Cain acted with precision and speed, Saurus and the others soon regrouped. Cain wasn't thrilled about the situation, but he had expected there might be some noise after acting, and there were some alert individuals among Saurus's group. But it didn't matter. Even if they detected him, Cain wasn't worried about his abilities, it would only make things a bit more complicated. Before they could fully regroup, Cain began moving again. He headed straight for the nearest person, and this time Cain didn't hide. As he ran swiftly, the grass rustled noticeably. Saurus and the others detected the movement and quickly began approaching. Before they could come together, Cain intercepted another individual. His Pokémon was an Oddish. When Cain appeared before him, the man was already prepared. Oddish stood in front of him with a serious expression, waiting for the enemy. But upon seeing Cain, he exclaimed, "I didn't expect it to be you, Cain, number 1. His pupils dilated sharply, and his expression of surprise left no doubt. Only then did he understand that the opportunity Saurus and Sky had mentioned was actually to confront Cain, the first place in the trial. But it was too late to regret it. The air was thick with the smell of blood, evidence of Cain's ferocity. "He's here!" he shouted calmly, assuming a defensive stance. The best defense is offense. Oddish, use poison powder. Preparing for defense, he ordered Oddish to attack. He knew that if Oddish also defended, against the power of Cain's Murkrow's initial strike, and with the dual-type advantage, it probably wouldn't withstand even a single move. Cain smiled slightly. "Why didn't I eliminate him immediately?" "Because I wanted him to shout that." Now that he had achieved his goal, he had no further use for him. "Murkrow, don't hold back, use Gust and send the poison powder back. Slowpoke, use Confusion." Cain ordered the attack. With Cain's command, Murkrow, already prepared, flapped its wings rapidly. The flying-type energy condensed into 2 small tornadoes, swirling around the poisonous powder emitted by Oddish and returning it to the man and his Pokémon. Hearing Cain's order, the man, who was in a defensive position, attempted to roll to evade, but just as he moved, he felt an explosion in his head and then lost all sensation. Slowpoke's Confusion move was incredibly powerful, evidenced by the blood flowing from the man's nose. There was no doubt, with the dual-type advantage, and Slowpoke's Confusion move, both the man and his Oddish lost their lives. At that moment, Saurus and Sky, along with the last remaining follower, finally appeared before Cain. Upon seeing his companion lying on the ground, motionless, the last follower froze. He had thought that joining Saurus on this mission would involve no danger, that they'd merely earn points. Even when they decided to face someone, he believed that, with their numerical advantage, they would have no problem defending themselves, no matter how strong the opponent was. But in the end, the situation hadn't turned out as he expected. Seeing that their opponent was Cain, besides the surprise on his face, he instantly understood why. He never would have guessed that Saurus planned to face Cain, the number 1. As Saurus appeared, Cain smirked slightly, flashing a malicious grin, and said, "We meet again, Saurus." Chapter 45, The First Subordinate. Upon hearing Cain's words, Saurus's face turned pale. He hadn't expected things to reach this point. Observing the Murkrow flying above Cain's head and the pink Slowpoke by his side, Saurus understood everything. He realized that he had underestimated Cain. While everyone else struggled to train their first Pokémon, Cain had already captured a second, and both were incredibly powerful. Comparing the forces in the field, Saurus realized that his team was at a disadvantage. Glaring at Cain, if looks could kill, Cain would have died 1,000 times. Finally, gritting his teeth, Saurus spat out a few words, "This time, we lost. Let's go." With that, he grabbed the dazed man and tried to retreat. Cain sneered and said, "Now you want to leave? Don't you think it's a little too late? Murkrow, use gust." Hearing this, Murkrow flapped its wings, and a whirlwind appeared behind them, blocking their retreat. "Cain, don't push it. If we keep this up, we'll die together." Saurus's face twisted with rage, his eyes burning. He had never felt so humiliated, even when Xander spoke to him, it was never with such disrespect. "Die together? If the fish dies, the net won't break. Want to test it out?" Cain said as he stepped forward, followed closely by Slowpoke. Someone who had tried to kill him couldn't just leave like that, without consequences. That wasn't Cain's style. Caw! Murkrow cawed. If Cain hadn't stopped it, Murkrow would have already attacked. Saurus remained motionless for a moment and cast a meaningful look at Sky, who hadn't spoken. It was a signal for him to talk. Noticing the gesture, Cain turned his gaze to the young, unremarkable man. He observed his Icans, and the system displayed the data of this Pokémon. Pokémon, Icans, orange. Gender, female. Level, 19. Type, poison. Ability, shed skin. Held item, none. Egg move, poison tail. Basic moves, wrap, leer, poison sting, bite, glare, screech. Learned moves, acid. Trademark moves, none. Cain looked at Sky with some surprise. He hadn't expected Sky to have trained Icans up to level 19. If not for the limitations of its potential, Sky might have been the leader of his group. With a small flicker of interest, Cain had an idea. "What's your name?" Cain asked Sky indifferently. In this situation, being asked for his name surprised Sky, but after a moment of hesitation, he replied, "Sky." In a situation where they were at a disadvantage, it was better not to provoke Cain's anger. Besides, talking to him might buy some time to think of an escape. "Fight Cain? Don't even think about it." Couldn't he see the corpse on the ground? Initially, Sky had only thought Cain had a powerful Murkrow, and even then, they only decided to attack after careful consideration. But now Cain clearly had an equally strong Slowpoke, while they were only 3 people, one of whom hadn't even recovered from the shock. There was no comparison in terms of power. Sky wasn't foolish enough to provoke Cain and invite death. Yet, even after considering all factors, Sky couldn't find a way to escape. Despair began to creep into his heart. He had worked hard to elevate Saurus, using his power and position to gain many resources that had allowed him to train his Icans to its current level. But what he hadn't expected was that Cain's next words would leave everyone speechless. "You're not bad. Are you interested in working for me?" With a simple question, everyone's expressions changed dramatically. The follower in despair suddenly saw a glimmer of hope. If Cain wanted to recruit Sky, that meant he still had a chance to survive. Even if he were a fool, he understood that Saurus had used him as a pawn. In front of the powerful Cain, he had no intention of resisting. The most dramatic change was seen on Saurus's face, showing a mix of emotions. He never would have imagined that Cain would try to recruit Sky. Saurus was ready to fight alongside Sky against Cain, hoping for a slim chance to escape. But that hope vanished with Cain's single statement. On the other hand, Sky's reaction was the calmest. He only stared at Cain, trying to gauge his intentions. Did Cain truly want to recruit him, or was he merely trying to divide their forces and then defeat them one by one? But after observing for a moment, he couldn't read anything from Cain's face. Cain said nothing more, merely watching him in silence, awaiting his response. In fact, Cain hadn't made this offer on a whim. With his experience in Team Rocket, Cain knew very well that in an organization where power groups dominated, a lone person would never get far. There were 2 options: join a group or become a leader. Though the first option was far easier than the second, Cain chose the second without hesitation. If he wanted to obtain more resources, he needed to be in control. Although he might not be able to form his own group immediately, nothing stopped him from planting the seeds of his future influence now. And the best time to start was while everyone was still trainees. In his past life, Xander had quickly risen through the ranks in Team Rocket. Part of his success was because he had built his base of followers on the trial island, paving the way for his future development. Thus, Cain had always planned to form his own group. Even if he didn't need it in the future, it would be a safety net. Sky had caught Cain's attention partly due to luck but also because he had some potential. Cain believed that if he provided Sky with a good Pokémon, Sky could perform much better. It didn't take long for Sky to grit his teeth and nod. Alright. What other choice did he have in this situation? If he said no, he would die. Cain was satisfied with Sky's response. Though it was partly a forced answer, Sky proved to be aware of the situation, which was useful. With a good Pokémon, his power wouldn't be inferior to Soros's. Chapter 46, Handing Over Coughing. When Soros heard Sky's response, his eyes filled with rage, and he shot a look of hatred at him. Now, his resentment towards Sky surpassed even that he felt for Cain. However, Soros was quick to react. In that moment, he turned and began to run. Before, when he and Sky joined forces, they might still not have been a match for Cain. Now that he was alone, staying meant suicide. If he didn't flee now, what else could he do? Wait for his death? Cain watched Soros's movements and laughed disdainfully. If Soros had chosen to attack, Cain might have found him more worthy of respect. Slowpoke, confusion, Cain ordered. In such an uneven situation of power, Soros was nothing more than a sheep waiting to be sacrificed. Slowpoke's eyes shone with a red glow, and a wave of psychic energy spread from its body, directed at the fleeing Soros. Coughing, stop him! Soros cried, his eyes wide and his face twisted in despair, prepared to abandon Coughing if necessary. Cough! Coughing hesitated briefly, but it obeyed its trainer's command and positioned itself to intercept Slowpoke's confusion move. The psychic type has a double advantage over the poison type. Moreover, Coughing's low special defense meant that, with a single hit, it fell to the ground, unable to continue the battle. Sky narrowed his eyes, maintaining a calm appearance, though inside his mind was in turmoil. When Cain had recruited him, Sky had simply thought of accepting to buy time and see how things unfolded. However, seeing how Soros's powerful Coughing was defeated in a single strike by Cain's Slowpoke, he began to think that following Cain might not be a bad option after all. Cain, keeping an eye on Sky, noticed that while his expression hadn't changed, his eyes revealed his inner agitation. The defeat of Coughing was not only meant to showcase Slowpoke's strength but also to send a clear message to Sky. Cain knew Sky wouldn't submit so easily, and that his initial acceptance was more out of fear than genuine loyalty. But Cain was confident in his ability to keep Sky under control, ensuring he wouldn't dare think of rebelling. Realizing his Coughing had been defeated, Soros ran even more desperately. But as a human, he couldn't hope to escape a Pokémon. Murkrow, finish him off, Cain ordered, uninterested in Soros's desperate escape. Murkrow nodded and, with a flap of its wings, quickly caught up with Soros. With a slash of its claws, it added another body to the ground. Soros, who had once had his moment of glory at the base, would never have imagined this would be his final fate. As for the last survivor of the group, Cain decided not to kill him. If he planned to form a team, a single follower like Sky wouldn't be enough. He would need more members for his group. Cain approached Soros's body, observing his open eyes filled with horror and regret. Skillfully, he removed his rocket belt, and after a moment's thought, he also took the Pokeball at his waist. He pressed the button on the Pokeball to recall Coughing, then locked it. Under Sky's surprised gaze, Cain tossed him the Pokeball containing Coughing and said disdainfully, "This Pokémon is yours now. I hope you won't disappoint me." Soros's Coughing had a dark yellow quality, much better than the orange quality of his Akan's. "This is for me?" Sky asked incredulously, wanting confirmation. Ignoring the other man's envy and jealousy, Sky gripped the Pokeball in his hand like a lifeline, clutching it so tightly his fingers turned white. This was the Pokémon that had ranked 5th in the previous trial. For anyone who could control it, it was like leaping directly to that position, something that would be tempting to anyone. "What's wrong? Can't you handle it?" Cain frowned. For a Pokémon with a previous trainer, adapting to a new one wasn't easy. It often wasn't simple to gain its loyalty. But Cain believed Sky had the necessary skills to achieve it. "No, thank you." Sky shook his head repeatedly, bowing slightly, showing respect, though unsure how to address Cain. "Call me Cain," Cain said, unconcerned about formal titles. "Yes, thank you, Sir Cain," Sky said, bowing further, quickly adapting to his new role. Cain nodded, approving of Sky's response. Sky was older than Cain, who was only 15 and still growing. Sky, at 18, was already taller than Cain. However, to show respect, he bowed so deeply it was almost like a reverence. First the punishment, then the reward. This was a tactic Cain often used in his past life, one of the most effective. Cain looked at the man who had been silent the entire time. Aside from a glance filled with envy when Cain handed coughing to Sky, the man seemed to be in a state of shock. For him, that day had been a nightmare. His 4 companions were dead, and the man he had so admired, Saurus, hadn't escaped that fate. Sky, whom he considered his second in command, had betrayed him. Now, he didn't even know what his next step would be, let alone if he'd survive. Seeing his dazed state, Sky frowned and kicked him to snap him out of it. The man reacted immediately, his face pale as he looked at Cain and Sky, stammering. Boss, my name is Fox, my nickname is Fox. My Pokémon is a coughing. I'm willing to swear loyalty. Please don't kill me. Cain had already scanned his Pokémon, a level 16 coughing with orange quality, quite common. However, if he survived, he could be a useful asset. From now on, follow Sky, Cain said indifferently. Yes, yes, yes. Fox responded, bowing deeply. He secretly breathed a sigh of relief. At least, for now, his life was safe. Moreover, working for Cain seemed far safer than following Saurus. Cain was the first in the rankings, and Saurus hadn't been able to withstand even a single attack from him. Chapter 47, Continuing the Path. Sky, when you return, start recruiting people. You can use my name, but we don't need those who act one way and then do something else behind our backs. Cain had only this requirement for the people they would recruit in the future. As for people with a good nature, forget it, once they become trial trainers, people with that kind of personality don't survive long, much less when they enter Team Rocket. Cain isn't a saint, his subordinates may have their flaws, but the only ones he can't stand are hypocrites, like that miserable worm Saurus. Understood, Sir Cain. Sky gladly accepted Cain's demand. Now that he had Saurus's Pokémon, he just needed to tame it a bit to gain considerable strength. Plus, with Cain's power, he could confidently recruit those loners. He felt slightly excited. He hadn't expected that, after this disaster, he wouldn't lose his life and would also obtain a high-quality Pokémon. Over time, he was sure he could surpass Saurus. He gripped Coughing's Pokeball tightly in his hand, controlling his trembling. Cain seemed to be a leader who didn't fuss over details, so the task of building the organization would fall to him. This would be far more powerful than being Saurus's assistant. However, for now, he didn't dare to entertain any traitorous thoughts. Cain not only had outstanding strength but also immense potential. If he stayed close to him, his position in Team Rocket would rise significantly. Cain thought for a moment, then tossed Saurus's Team Rocket belt to Sky. Here are all the resources that originally belonged to you. You'll be in charge of keeping them. Cain wasn't particularly interested in Saurus's points, but even small amounts add up. He gave them to Sky as initial funding, to be used efficiently. Sky looked at Saurus's Team Rocket belt with a complicated gaze. He and Saurus had played together since childhood, in a relationship of both friends and rivals. However, luck had always favored Saurus, and he had always been one step ahead. Perhaps due to so much good luck, it only took one stroke of bad luck for him to fall into an abyss from which he couldn't escape. Now he would no longer have anyone to compete against, and his heart was filled with conflicting emotions. Well, if you can't complete the mission this time, leave it for now. Your main task now is to tame Coughing. Try to achieve good results in the next trial, Cain said calmly as he looked at Sky. I'm going to continue with my mission. With that, Cain headed into the depths of the forest. He wasn't interested in worrying about how Sky and Fox would return, or whether they would do so safely. If they didn't even have the ability to survive in the wild, then Cain would have misjudged them. As Cain walked away, Murkrow and Slowpoke followed closely. They didn't question why he hadn't eliminated the 2 people who had originally planned to attack him. That was Cain's decision, and as his Pokémon, they didn't question such things. Fox, seeing Cain's figure disappear into the forest, exhaled a long sigh of relief and collapsed to the ground, not caring that there was a corpse nearby. Although Cain seemed easy to deal with, he generated immense pressure. Especially with the 2 corpses still on the ground, reminding him of what had just happened. Cain didn't have high expectations for Sky and Fox. This act was merely an experiment. If it worked, it would be a gain, and if it failed, it didn't matter much, as it was only a dark yellow quality Pokémon. After all, this was only on the trial island. It's really annoying, we've veered off the path again, Cain murmured with a wry smile. Earlier, to confront Saurus and the others, he had strayed from his original route, leading them through this grassy field and using the terrain to defeat them one by one, as well as recruiting 2 new subordinates. I have no other choice. Slowpoke, use teleport to get back on the path, Cain said, realizing the situation. Fortunately, he had Slowpoke, which meant that even if he veered off, he could use teleport to return to the correct path. Slowpoke didn't react much. After all, it was just another use of the teleport move. Its eyes shone with a blue light enveloping Cain and Murkrow, and in an instant, they vanished from the spot. Upon opening his eyes again, they were back on the original path. It's a really useful move. Well done, Slowpoke. Slowpoke's teleport was an invaluable move for survival in the wild, useful for both advancing and escaping. However, the teleport move has its limitations. The first is that it can't cover too long a distance, the range depends on the Pokémon's psychic strength. The stronger the Pokémon, the further it can travel. The second limitation is that it can't teleport to unknown places. It can only move to locations it has visited and has a clear memory of. The third limitation is that during the use of teleport, there should be no psychic interference, otherwise, it could cause spatial distortion, making it end up in an unexpected place. In fact, there's a fourth limitation: the greater the distance, the longer it takes to prepare the move. This makes sense, as selecting the correct point among various coordinates containing psychic energy takes time. Observing the familiar path and known surroundings, Cain couldn't help but laugh. It seemed he would have to walk it again. Fortunately, he hadn't gone back to the place where he first met Slowpoke, but to the point he had just left. Since he had traveled this path before and knew what awaited him, Cain quickened his pace. According to the map, there was still a long way to the mission's destination. According to the map's directions, Cain had to pass through several Pokémon territories before reaching the mission site. Continuing on his path, the first territory he would reach was that of the Scyther. Cain had always had a certain fascination with Scyther. If he had the chance and found one of good quality, he'd consider capturing it. Although Scyther doesn't have a direct evolution but only a branching evolution into Scizor, which gains metal armor, it doesn't improve in terms of overall stats. It simply transforms its speed into physical defense, shifting from an assassin to an excellent warrior. However, according to Cain's memories, Scizor can Mega Evolve, which would mean a big boost in its power. As he neared the Scyther territory, Cain couldn't help but feel a slight anticipation. Chapter 48, Scyther. However, unlike the aggressive Beedrill or the Pinsir who enjoy intimidating the weaker ones, Scyther are proud and confident. As long as they're not provoked, they generally won't attack first. Facing these wild Pokémon in a one-on-one duel didn't worry Cain, but these Pokémon that live in groups tend to work as a team. If you upset one, the whole group will quickly appear. If they all attacked at once, they would easily overwhelm Cain by sheer numbers. Additionally, as Cain ventured further into the forest, the level of the Pokémon also increased. Cain had no idea what level the Scyther he would encounter might be. Thinking about it now wouldn't be of much help, so Cain quickened his pace while Slowpoke and Murkrow constantly guarded him. Cain's endurance had also improved recently. After walking for an hour, he didn't feel especially tired, just a bit short of breath. For Murkrow and Slowpoke, this was like breathing, something very easy. If it weren't for the wild Pokémon that attempted to ambush them along the way, this would have been easier than training for them. Finally, Cain arrived at the Scyther territory marked on the map and proceeded with more caution. Although capturing Slowpoke had greatly increased his power, one should never lower their guard in the wild. The journey had been fairly smooth, aside from a few overly confident wild Pokémon who tried to attack them and were easily defeated by Murkrow and Slowpoke. There were no major incidents. Most Pokémon, sensing the threatening presence and the scent of blood from his team, preferred to keep their distance. Finally, upon entering Scyther territory, in the center of the area, Cain found a group of the Pokémon he had so longed to see, about 10 of them. Proud as they are, Scyther prefer to fight opponents of similar level. In this forest, there weren't many Pokémon worth their while, so they mostly spent their time training with each other. When Cain saw them, they were in the middle of a fierce battle. Upon spotting Cain, they also noticed him. Two of the Scyther, who were in the midst of an intense fight, stopped. One of them, more robust, stepped forward and took the lead, looking at the three newcomers with a serious expression. Cain's eyes sparkled a bit, and the system displayed the leader Scyther's data. Pokémon, Scyther, dark yellow. Gender, male. Level, 23. Type, bug and flying. Ability, technician. Held item, none. Egg move, endure. Basic moves, vacuum wave, quick attack, leer, focus energy, pursuit, false swipe, agility, wing attack. Learned moves, bug buzz, bug bite. Trademark moves, none. It was a powerful Pokémon. Cain glanced at the other Scyther, all were above level 20. In addition to the dark yellow quality leader, there were two others of yellow quality. However, Cain decided not to attempt capturing any of them. Not only would it be difficult to capture one of these powerful Scyther in the middle of a group, but the leader Scyther itself was quite troublesome. As a speed-based Pokémon, although Murkrow had a type advantage, his main advantage speed wouldn't be as significant, and Scyther, with its high physical power, could deal considerable damage if it struck. Additionally, the numerical advantage was considerable. Even if he managed to defeat the leader, he wasn't certain Slowpoke could protect him from all the attacking Scyther. It's important to remember that, being so fast, they could prevent Slowpoke from using teleport to escape. Moreover, none of the Scyther in the group met Cain's standards for potential, so capturing them wasn't worth much. Some Scyther in the group showed interest in fighting, feeling the threat posed by Murkrow and Slowpoke. For them, lovers of combat and challenges, these were perfect opponents. However, before they could attack, the leader stopped them. It could see beyond what its companions perceived. Not only did it feel the threat of the Pokémon, but it also sensed an aura of gravity from the human, as if he didn't fear its group. This feeling could only mean two things: either the human was a fool who didn't understand the situation, or he possessed real power. Its instinct told it that if they attacked, they should be prepared for half of the group to perish. Although they enjoyed fighting, that didn't mean they were unafraid of death. Thus, the leader Scyther held back its impulsive companions, watching as Cain and his Pokémon cautiously retreated. Scyther respects strength. If they believe in an opponent's power, they will allow them to pass through their territory without issue. The reason Scyther had their own territory wasn't due to a strong sense of territory but because of their combative nature. The neighboring Pokémon feared them so much that they gradually abandoned the surrounding areas, turning them into Scyther territory. After crossing the Scyther territory without incident, Cain finally passed through the forest marked on the map Umbra had provided. All that remained was to cross a rocky region to reach the place where the mission item was located. However, after a day of travel, Cain had not only fought with attacking Pokémon but had also gained a better understanding of the territory of the more powerful Pokémon indicated on the map. Along the entire route, the only complicated territory had been that of the Scyther at the beginning, with a level 23 Scyther and 10 others of level 20 or higher, a formidable group. Then he crossed the Paras territory, where many types of mushrooms grew. The Paras's activity area centered around these mushrooms, which served as their food. The Paras's leader, a level 24 Parasect, led the group. Paras are peaceful, and unlike other Pokémon that attack intruders in their territory, they don't. Both Paras and Parasect have a great weakness against flying types, so Murkrow was a considerable threat to them. However, due to Cain's hurry, he chose not to attack them. Furthermore, within the Paras group, there weren't many with good potential. Although the group was large, they were the calmest Pokémon in the region. In Paras's land, many other Pokémon coexisted, mostly in harmony. When Cain passed through with Murkrow and Slowpoke, he was almost never attacked. Chapter 49, The Irritated Nidoking. After crossing the Paras territory, there lies the territory of a group of Mankey. Unlike the Paras, Mankey are extremely aggressive and will mercilessly attack any Pokémon that dares to enter their territory. The Mankey group occupies a vast berry forest, the largest Cain has seen on the Trial Island. These Mankey have a very strong sense of their territory, and any Pokémon that enters without permission will suffer their furious onslaught. They are like a gang ruling the mountains. Within the Mankey group, there is a leader with the leadership ability at level 23. With its leadership skill, its potential barely reached green quality, but it's still very powerful. Furthermore, it is backed by an endless number of common Mankey, making it a dominating force on the outskirts of the Trial Island. So, when Cain and his team entered, the entire group of Mankey went completely mad. To them, any intruder is suspected of trying to steal their berries. When Cain unknowingly allowed Murkrow to gather the first berry, it was like stirring a hornet's nest. Hundreds of Mankey launched themselves at them. Luckily, Mankey are fighting-type Pokémon, making them vulnerable to flying and psychic types, giving Murkrow and Slowpoke an advantage. As they fought and retreated, they launched relentless attacks, and Cain even removed Murkrow's extra weight so it could defeat the Mankey more quickly. It was a race to escape Mankey territory, but they managed to get out. However, the Mankey group suffered great losses from their encounter with Cain and his team, losing about a third of their strength. It's important to remember there were nearly 1,000 Mankey, and Cain, with Murkrow and Slowpoke, defeated almost 100. As a result of this battle, Murkrow and Slowpoke leveled up. Murkrow reached level 19, and Slowpoke reached 21. Not only did they gain experience, but they also improved their control over their respective types, flying for Murkrow and psychic for Slowpoke. So, although it was a tough battle, the rewards were abundant. After crossing the Mankey territory, Cain and his team were exhausted. They spent the entire night camping in a relatively safe area to regain their strength. Thanks to the yellow berry energy poke blocks Cain had been giving to Slowpoke, its previously stagnant potential began to recover. After the battle with the Mankey, Slowpoke's potential returned to dark green, a level higher than Murkrow's. This small advancement in potential improved Slowpoke's control over its psychic abilities by 20%. Slowpoke was already outstanding in its control over psychic abilities, but this increase made it even more precise. Murkrow watched Slowpoke's progress with envy and motivation, eager to push itself harder, and asked Cain to increase its weight training load by 10 kilograms. However, after Cain's persuasion, it begrudgingly accepted a more modest increase of 5 kilograms. Cain understood Murkrow's desires, but he also knew that progress couldn't be rushed. Increasing the weight too much could cause physical problems, potentially leading to hidden injuries. Thanks to his previous training experience, Cain knew how dangerous these injuries could be. Some Pokémon with great potential end up with less success than others with lesser potential due to poorly treated injuries. Hidden injuries are hard to treat. They can only heal with a long period of rest, which means the Pokémon cannot train or fight, wasting valuable development time. By the time they recover, they've already been outpaced by others. That's why Cain decided to increase Murkrow's extra weight by only 5 kilograms, an amount that wouldn't significantly affect its combat ability. After crossing a relatively safe area without large groups of powerful Pokémon, they arrived at the territory of the strongest group Cain had seen. Although this group is small, with only 5 Pokémon, including 3 under level 10, they occupy the largest territory, and no one dares to challenge them. This group is dominated by a level 32 Nidoking and a level 30 Nidoqueen, along with lower-level Nidoran and Nidoran. The Nidoking occupy an area rich in resources. In their territory, there is a natural lake and a low hill, with a green meadow by the lake, where some weak Butterfree live as playmates and bodyguards for the Nidoran. On the hill, a variety of berries and herbs grow, and the lake is full of peaceful Pokémon and many fish, which are the main food source for the Nidoking family. Normally, Nidoking and Nidoqueen don't leave their self-sufficient territory, and thanks to their great strength, no other Pokémon dares to challenge them. When Cain saw Nidoking and Nidoqueen, he was surprised. These Pokémon only evolve from Nidorino and Nidorina with the help of a moonstone, so finding even one of these species is rare, but seeing 2 at once was unexpected. Driven by curiosity, Cain stealthily approached the lake to see if there was a source of moonstones in the area. However, before he could get close, Nidoking detected him. Nidoking showed no kindness and launched a fierce attack on Cain. If it weren't for Murkrow's protect move, they would have been crushed in a single blow. Cain had no choice but to flee, using his team's speed to escape Nidoking's territory. However, Nidoking pursued them for quite a stretch. Cain decided to leave the search for moonstones for later, when his team is stronger. For now, Nidoking alone is strong enough to pose a problem for them, and with Nidoqueen's assistance, their combined strength would be even more devastating. It's no wonder they can dominate such vast territory and resources. Although the Mankey group was numerous, they were just a bunch of weaklings in the face of Nidoking. If it weren't for fatigue, Nidoking could wipe out the entire Mankey group by himself, thanks to his tough armor that practically ignores their attacks, and with his powerful arms, he could sweep away dozens with a single blow. With Nidoqueen by his side, the Mankey don't dare challenge his authority. This shows how formidable Nidoking is. Cain had barely escaped the Mankey group, and Nidoking could already destroy them with ease. Fortunately, after crossing Nidoking's territory, Cain finally reached a stone field. Looking at the map in his hand, Cain murmured, "I just need to cross this stone field to reach the mission location." Finally, Cain was close to the mission's objective and could breathe a little easier. If he wanted to return before the next trial, he didn't have much time left. Chapter 50, Naive Onyx. They're finally about to reach their destination, so there's no longer a rush. After a long trek, the priority for Cain and his team is now to have lunch and let Murkrow and Slowpoke rest a bit to recover their energy. They found a large, relatively flat rock, and Cain took out all his tools. Although this is a stone forest, not everything is just rock. In fact, there's more dry grass and withered reeds here than in a forest. They lit a fire and, using the stones abundant in the area, built an improvised oven. Then they placed a small pot on top and carefully poured in the water they had collected earlier from the lake. In the wild, it's best not to drink unboiled water. Even if it looks clean, no one can say how many bacteria it might contain. Murkrow and Slowpoke, being Pokémon with bodies and resistance much stronger than humans, wouldn't have any problems, but Cain can't take the risk. Getting sick from drinking unboiled water, without the right medicines, could be very dangerous in the wilderness. Cain doesn't want to face a situation where, after surviving all the battles, he ends up sick due to a careless everyday detail. While the water boiled, Cain took out food for Murkrow and Slowpoke. In addition to their usual poke blocks, Murkrow had a rabbit they had caught earlier, while Slowpoke enjoyed his favorite fish. Cain has spoiled their tastes. Slowpoke used to enjoy eating raw fish, but ever since he tried Cain's grilled fish and meats, he's lost interest in raw fish. Murkrow has also developed certain preferences. Although he always has enough poke blocks to stay nourished, he needs a bit of meat in every meal to feel satisfied. With Slowpoke's help, they cleaned the rabbit and 5 fish as thick as an arm, covering the organs and blood with dirt. In the wild, Cain doesn't want to attract a bunch of Pokémon with the smell of blood while eating. Once the water boiled, he poured it into a bottle to have enough drinking water for the afternoon. Then, like an expert, Cain started grilling the food, applying oil, turning it over, and adding seasonings. The delicious aroma filled the air as he prepared the meal. For Cain, a rabbit leg and half a fish are enough to satisfy him, leaving the rest for Murkrow and Slowpoke. Murkrow and Slowpoke quickly devoured their lunch. After a brief rest, they continued on their way. Traveling through the stone forest was much more comfortable than crossing a regular forest, though the terrain was uneven with raised stones everywhere. But compared to the dense foliage of a forest, where every step can hide an obstacle, the terrain in the stone forest is visible, so there's no risk of tripping unexpectedly. The best part is that the Pokémon inhabiting this stone forest are mostly Geodude, who, although numerous, are calm and peaceful. As long as they aren't stepped on, they won't cause trouble. Geodude prefer tranquility and can spend the whole afternoon motionless in a pile of rocks. The Geodude in this area are relatively low level. Cain hasn't encountered any above level 20, and he hasn't even seen a Graveler, their evolved form. The path was easy to traverse, and without the hassle of occasional Pokémon attacks, Cain made good progress. In just half an hour, he had crossed half of the stone forest. At this rate, he would soon reach his destination. However, as often happens, something unexpected occurred. A Pokémon blocked his path, though unintentionally, its massive size simply obstructed the way. The Pokémon blocking the path was an imposing Onix. Pokémon, Onix, dark yellow. Gender, male. Level, 30. Type, rock/ground. Ability, sturdy. Held item, none. Egg moves, defense curl, rock climb. Basic moves, mud sport, tackle, harden, bind, curse, rock throw, rock tomb, rage, stealth rock, rock polish, gyro ball, smackdown, dragon breath, slam. Learned moves, iron head. Trademark moves, none. This Onix rested on a huge rock, blocking the way. If they wanted to pass, they would have to climb over its body. Although Onix isn't an aggressive Pokémon, letting Cain and his team climb over him would probably make him furious. Taking an alternative route wasn't a viable option, as the stone walls on both sides stretched as far as the eye could see. Cain sighed and murmured to himself, "A level 30 Onix, this is tricky." The stone forest lacks resources, so there aren't powerful groups of Pokémon claiming this vast area. Only Geodude and Onix, who don't require large resources, thrive here, as the rocks rich in minerals are their favorite food. The stone forest abounds with rocks, their greatest treasure. However, since the Geodude here are low level, the stones in this place probably don't contain rich minerals. Otherwise, the Geodude would be at higher levels. But then, how did this onyx reach level 30? Cain observed the onyx again, resting comfortably in the sun, and suddenly an idea came to him. Slowpoke, use rain dance on onyx, Cain ordered, using one of Slowpoke's egg moves. Slowpoke nodded, slightly opened his mouth, and began to emit a soft sound, almost like a chant with a peculiar melody. As Slowpoke sang, small black clouds began to appear in the sky, gathering right over Onyx. Onyx! The Onyx, who was happily enjoying the sun, suddenly felt the temperature drop. Its half-closed eyes noticed the light disappear. Bewildered, it opened its eyes and saw that the sun had vanished, and a black cloud had appeared above its head. Seeing the cloud about to release rain, Onyx looked around, searching for anything suspicious, but found nothing. However, it noticed that a few meters away, the sun was still shining brightly. Despite its massive size, Onyx had a rather naive nature. With its limited mental capacity, it didn't think much about what was happening. Finding nothing suspicious, Onyx had no choice but to give in. When the first raindrop fell on its body, Onyx, reluctantly, began to move. Although the area where it was lying was its favorite sunbathing spot, and it had been lying there for years, for Onyx, who is extremely vulnerable to water, the rain was much more annoying than losing his favorite spot. From their hiding place behind a stone pillar, Cain and Slowpoke watched as Onyx quickly moved away once the rain began to fall. The rumble of rocks being dragged by Onyx's massive body gradually faded until finally, the path was clear. As soon as Onyx was out of sight, Cain ordered Slowpoke to stop the rain dance. The clouds quickly dispersed, allowing the sun to shine again, with only a few puddles on the rocks as evidence of what had just happened. After waiting a few minutes to make sure Onyx wouldn't return, Cain moved forward with Murkrow and Slowpoke. They saw that between the tall cliffs, there was a path wide enough for 3 people to walk side by side. The path rose toward the sky, forming a landscape known as a line in the sky. Onyx had been resting right at the entrance of this passage. Entering this narrow passage made the temperature drop immediately, with a cold, enveloping feeling, as if they were standing in front of a refrigerator in the middle of summer. The air inside the passage was also very dry, creating a cold and dry atmosphere. As they moved forward, life around them dwindled until it disappeared entirely, not even a single blade of grass grew there. It's understandable, as the sun never reaches this place, the air is cold and dry, and it rarely rains. Even moss, which is incredibly resilient, needs at least some water to survive. Suddenly, about a third of the way through this narrow passage, they noticed a huge cave in the rock wall. The cave entrance was over 2 meters high and wide enough for 3 people to pass through at the same time. From the outside, the cave looked like an abyss of darkness. Chapter 51, Larvitar Egg. Cain looked at the hole, momentarily stunned. How can there be a cave in a place like this? And it looks like it's been here a long time. The cave showed signs of having been dug, yet parts appeared natural. Clearly, it had originally been a natural cave that some Pokémon had expanded. The claw marks on the dugout sections were already somewhat faded. Based on Cain's knowledge, it was clear that these marks could not have been made by a Geodude or a Graveler. Slowpoke, sense if there's any Pokémon inside, Cain instructed his Slowpoke. Yadan Slowpoke slightly closed its eyes, and a subtle psychic wave began to spread from its body. A few moments later, Slowpoke shook its head toward Cain, indicating it didn't sense any Pokémon presence. Seeing Slowpoke's confirmation, Cain relaxed a bit. He took a flashlight from his rocket belt and turned it on, illuminating the cave. The end of it was out of sight. After a brief hesitation, he decided to move forward. The space was relatively tight, so Murkrow perched on top of Slowpoke, who used its psychic power to stay close to Cain. After walking for several minutes, Cain noticed the cave expanding. He quickened his pace slightly, and finally, after 5 minutes, he reached the end. The end of the cave was a spacious area, but aside from rocks, there was nothing else. How strange, could it just be an empty cave? Cain murmured to himself while examining the area. Yadan! At that moment, Slowpoke gently tugged on Cain's leg, indicating a direction within the cave with a soft grunt. Cain's heart quickened as he followed the direction Slowpoke was pointing to. On the dark cave wall, there was a stalagmite as thick as a person, stretching from top to bottom. At the tip of the stalagmite, a drop of thick, milky liquid hung, full and rounded, yet not falling, clinging to the tip of the rock. A soft, comforting aroma emanated from that drop of milky liquid, spreading less than a meter before dispersing into the air. It was no wonder Cain hadn't detected it initially. "This is geocentric cleansing milk!" Cain exclaimed in surprise. Geocentric cleansing milk is one of the natural wonders of the Pokémon world, formed by an accumulation of minerals in nature. It's filled with energy and minerals. Consuming it can strengthen a Pokémon's body and increase its physical defense. When mixed with other ingredients to create Pokeblocks, its effects are even greater. Even humans can consume geocentric cleansing milk. Not only does it prevent diseases and improve immunity, but it also extends life and strengthens the body. Within Team Rocket, geocentric cleansing milk can be exchanged as well, but due to its extreme rarity and powerful effects, as soon as it appears, it's quickly acquired by various factions, being an incredibly sought-after item. Cain recalled that in his past life, when a batch of geocentric cleansing milk appeared on the exchange list, it sold out in less than a minute, even at a price of 1,000 points per drop. Due to its life-extending properties, it's highly sought after by great families and powerful organizations. Unless in extreme need of money, no one would be willing to sell it. Geocentric cleansing milk takes months to form a single drop. It's a shame there's so little of it, Cain sighed again. Without needing further instruction, Slowpoke looked at the ground, and its eyes began to glow blue. A rock the size of a pot lid was lifted by its psychic power. Immediately, a strong, pleasant aroma filled the air, and just inhaling it, Cain felt his entire body relax. Underneath the rock, there was a pool of geocentric cleansing milk. The drop that had been hanging from the stalagmite finally fell, merging smoothly into the milk pool. The impact of the drop created tiny ripples on the surface, but it didn't splash at all. Cain watched in amazement, unable to believe so much geocentric cleansing milk had accumulated here. Looking at the milky liquid emitting a faint glow, he couldn't help but swallow hard. In the silence of the cave, the sound of his gulp was extremely clear. Finally regaining his composure, Cain took out several flasks and containers from his belt. Slowpoke cleaned them carefully, and Murkrow dried them with a gust, making sure not a single drop of water remained. Then, Cain used a spoon, usually for preparing Pokeblocks, to carefully scoop up the geocentric cleansing milk and fill the containers. However, to Cain's surprise, as he filled one of the flasks, he discovered a Pokémon egg inside the pool of geocentric cleansing milk. A Pokémon egg had been kept in this geocentric cleansing milk, which had likely accumulated over many years. Immediately, Cain remembered the claw marks at the cave's entrance and in various parts of the interior. Could it be that a Pokémon placed this egg here? Cain thought to himself. With how much time has passed, this egg is probably already dead. Even seeing the egg's shell, not even the system could scan its status. Without rushing, Cain continued filling the flasks with geocentric cleansing milk. As the containers filled, the milk pool's level dropped, finally revealing the entire egg. The system activated in Cain's mind, and the complete data on this egg, which had been here for an indeterminate time, appeared before him. Pokémon, Larvitar, egg form, cannot be incubated, blue. Gender, male. Level, 1. Type, rock/ground. Ability, guts. Held item, essence of geocentric cleansing milk. Egg moves, dragon dance, outrage, ancient power, stealth rock. Basic moves, bite, leer. Learned moves, none. Trademark moves, none. Cain looked at the egg in disbelief, letting the spoon in his hand drop to the ground. He would never have imagined that the egg inside the geocentric cleansing milk was a Larvitar egg. This also explained the claw marks at the entrance and the cave's size. Additionally, looking at Larvitar's inherited moves, which included Dragon Dance and Outrage, two incredibly powerful moves, he could imagine how strong and talented its parents must have been. A blue-ranked and quasi-legendary Pokémon, with proper training, reaching the quasi-elite level was almost inevitable. In his past life, thanks to the advantage of the system, Cain had also owned a quasi-legendary Pokémon, though it wasn't a Larvitar. It was because of that Pokémon that Cain was able to reach the threshold of a quasi-elite trainer's strength. What does it mean that it cannot be incubated? Cain noticed that after the egg's description, the words "cannot be incubated" appeared. Since he had access to the system, this was the first time he had seen such an annotation. If the egg were dead, it being unincubable would make sense. But just by looking at it, the egg seemed full of life, which made the situation even more puzzling. Cain gently lifted the egg from the geocentric cleansing milk and placed it on a cloth on the ground. The egg, which radiated a soft glow, looked almost identical to the geocentric cleansing milk. Murkrow and Slowpoke moved closer. As Pokémon, their sensitivity was even greater. They could clearly sense the life within the egg but also noticed something unusual, as if a sadness emanated from it. Slowpoke gently brought its round pink head close to the egg. Cain observed Slowpoke's gesture and didn't stop it, understanding what his Pokémon wanted to do. Slowpoke rested its head on the egg and, with one of its front paws, pulled Cain, signaling him to place his hand on its back, while also indicating to Murkrow to do the same. Without hesitation, Cain placed his hand gently on Slowpoke's back. In that instant, the scenery before them changed. Chapter 52, A Mother's Love. The dark cave from before had disappeared, and now Cain, Slowpoke and Murkrow were in a meadow under a sunny sky. The place was full of flowers, birdsong, and a scene so pleasant that it was truly comforting. Suddenly, an enormous creature covered in light green armor appeared in the meadow. Everything changed. The pleasant scene vanished, and a sky filled with yellow sand began to spread everywhere, flying with the wind, gradually covering all the trees and grass. Roar! With a roar from that creature, the entire meadow finally turned into a desert. The creature, with spikes on its back and green armor, was none other than the final evolved form of Larvitar, Johto's pseudo-legendary Tyranitar. Also known as the Tyrant of the Desert. After arriving here, Tyranitar turned the entire meadow into a desert and then found a relatively comfortable spot to sit. It sat, and who knows how many days and nights passed. During that time, Tyranitar did not move from its place. Its originally violent nature had calmed down, becoming very quiet. However, while Tyranitar remained sitting, an unexpected group of intruders arrived in that desert. It was a group of Houndooms, about a dozen of them. When they saw Tyranitar, they did not hesitate at all and attacked immediately, as if they had already planned it. Tyranitar, who had been sitting in the desert for almost a month without eating or drinking, was at its weakest. But, when faced with the attack of the Houndoom pack, it showed no hesitation or fear and stood up to face them. A pseudo-legendary is worthy of its title. Despite not having eaten or drunk for so long, it was able to easily repel the Houndooms that charged at her. However, when Tyranitar stood up, Cain saw that the spot where it had been sitting all this time had left a deep pit, and in the pit, there was a Pokémon egg radiating a soft yellow light, identical to the egg they had found earlier in the geocentric cleansing milk. It turned out that Tyranitar had been sitting there for so long to give birth to that Pokémon egg, to give birth to her own child. The weakness after giving birth, along with a month without food, had left Tyranitar at her weakest since she evolved from Larvitar. That group of Houndooms had probably carefully planned the timing, intending to bring down the pseudo-legendary in that place. However, Tyranitar's strength far exceeded their expectations, especially now that she was in the desert. This was her domain. After a day and night of combat, the battered Tyranitar finally buried all the Houndooms in the desert forever. However, due to the intensity of the battle, Tyranitar had not been able to constantly care for her child. When she returned to the pit where she had been sitting for a month, she became enraged, desperate, lost, and also sad. Because her child, who had not yet been born, had been affected by the shockwaves of the battle, and a crack had appeared in the egg. As a mother, Tyranitar could clearly feel the life fading inside the Pokémon egg. Tyranitar knelt before the egg, with tears falling from her seemingly fierce eyes. Another day passed this way. When Tyranitar stood up again, the sadness in her eyes was undeniable. Regardless of her wounds, she gently picked up the Pokémon egg and began a journey to save her child. Cain and his group's gazes moved along with Tyranitar. It's unknown how much time passed, but Tyranitar's body weakened more and more, though she never let go of her child. As a pseudo-legendary who had fought around the world, she couldn't protect her own child, and in her eyes, a deep sense of guilt and self-condemnation could be seen. When the scene changed again, Cain recognized the place. They were in the familiar stone forest and also in the narrow passage known as One-Line Sky. Tyranitar walked with staggering steps, but the presence of a pseudo-legendary remained intact, and no Pokémon dared appear to obstruct her path. When Tyranitar reached One-Line Sky, her eyes, which had lost their brightness before, began to light up, and a glimpse of joy could even be seen on her face. She walked directly into One-Line Sky, and halfway through, she stopped in front of a cave in the mountainside. As a rock and dark type pseudo-legendary, Tyranitar had a much higher sensitivity to rocks than Geodude and Onix, Pokémon whose bodies are strong but whose minds are simple. She perceived a faint fluctuation coming from the cave, telling her that inside might be something she needed. But the cave was too small for her to enter. So, with one hand protecting the Pokémon egg and the other frantically starting to dig into the rock wall, the hard rock wall crumbled under Tyranitar's sharp claws as if it were tofu, easily creating a space large enough for her to pass through. The interior of the cave was the same as the place where Cain stood now, practically unchanged. Tyranitar, with her sharp perception, walked directly toward the geocentric cleansing milk well. At that time, the geocentric cleansing milk had not yet been covered by the rock. Seeing the geocentric cleansing milk, Tyranitar became excited. As a rock-type Pokémon, she understood the energy and mystical powers contained in the geocentric cleansing milk. With trembling hands, she carefully took out the Pokémon egg she was carrying. After so much time, the appearance of the Larvitar egg had worsened considerably. The shell that had once been crystalline and translucent was now very opaque, and the smooth surface had become quite rough. Tyranitar looked at the Pokémon egg deeply, with a gaze full of emotions that Cain, who had never had children, could not fully understand, but he grasped one thing: a mother's love. Tyranitar carefully placed the Pokémon egg into the well. Perhaps it was fate, as the geocentric cleansing milk completely covered the Pokémon egg, leaving not a single space. Seeing her child's fading life finally stop flowing away, Tyranitar could finally relax. But she also relaxed her tired body. The weakness after childbirth, the intense subsequent battle, the trauma of seeing her child almost die, and then the long journey made it so that, even though she was a pseudo-legendary, her body could no longer keep going. Clenching her teeth, with her last strength, she covered the geocentric cleansing milk well with rocks and then collapsed heavily to the ground. With an expression of relief, the light in her eyes began to fade. In fact, given the magic of the geocentric cleansing milk, if Tyranitar had drunk a little, she could have fully recovered from her injuries, and as a rock-type Pokémon, the geocentric cleansing milk could have had a highly beneficial effect on her, even increasing her power to another level. But she did not hesitate for a moment, not even considering it, because she knew that if her child was not completely submerged in the geocentric cleansing milk, the crack in the egg could not stop the loss of life. As a great mother, she preferred to give up her own life to give her child a chance to live. Tyranitar, born of rock, nourished by rock, over time her body also turned into a pile of rocks, accompanying her child, waiting for the day they would be reborn. The light changed, and Cain slowly opened his eyes. Slowpoke had mentally connected with Tyranitar's lingering obsession in the Pokémon egg, allowing them to see the entire story. Cain looked at the Larvitar egg with a complex expression, feeling the weight of maternal love. Murkrow and Slowpoke, who had also witnessed everything, had tears shining in their eyes, but thanks to their strength, they had not yet fallen. Chapter 53, The Mission Location. He crouched down, placing his hand on a nearby rock. He felt a cold sensation spread from his palm, but for some reason, it brought a sense of relief. Shaking his head, he tried to clear that feeling from his mind and carefully lifted the Larvitar egg. As he suspected, there was a small crack on the surface. Now, the crack was firmly sealed, thanks to the cleansing geocentric milk that had condensed over it, repairing the egg with nature's power. Additionally, the geocentric cleansing milk, known for its life-extending properties, had restored the life energy that Larvitar had lost. Feeling the vitality radiating from the egg, Cain reflected, a great mother, a great nature. By a series of coincidences, Cain had found this Larvitar egg. Perhaps it was meant to be. The layer of geocentric cleansing milk had allowed the egg's vitality to recover. If it could hatch, Larvitar would surely show extraordinary talent for the rock type. However, blessings can sometimes be a double-edged sword. The energy contained in the geocentric cleansing milk was so powerful that, after enveloping the egg for so many years, it had fused with the shell. This made hatching nearly impossible. So, according to the system's reading, this valuable pseudo-legendary Pokémon egg had become an egg full of life but unable to hatch. With mixed feelings, Cain handed the egg to Slowpoke, asking it to carefully hold it with its psychic power. Though it was a shame the egg couldn't hatch, Cain would still try to find an alternative method to make it happen. He gathered all the geocentric cleansing milk. Whether he sold it at the Team Rocket Exchange Center or traded it with other organizations or individuals, Cain could obtain a large amount of materials. With these resources, training his Pokémon would be much easier. It was a beneficial cycle. As the most important resource he had found so far, he couldn't afford to waste even a drop. He gathered all the geocentric cleansing milk from the small pool, filling 10 glass bottles. He even used bottles originally intended for water to hold the geocentric cleansing milk. If Cain decided to turn these 10 bottles of geocentric cleansing milk into points, he could earn nearly 1,000,000 points. However, he couldn't do that. Sometimes, having too many resources can be dangerous if others find out. In this situation, he needed to be discreet. Of course, exchanging a small amount for resources wouldn't be a problem. This would solve Cain's major concern about how to train his future Pokémon. From now on, any Pokémon that met his criteria could be captured. He would first gather his main 6 for the team. However, that didn't mean he would catch just any Pokémon. Only those with good natures and that met his requirements would be considered. He stored the 10 bottles of geocentric cleansing milk in his belt and sighed in relief. The journey to complete this mission had been worth it, if only for the cleansing milk. Geocentric cleansing milk is not just a medicine. If a ground or rock type Pokémon uses it as a catalyst, its power could increase tremendously, Cain thought. He was considering capturing a ground or rock type Pokémon. Better to finish the mission first. If I find one, I'll consider it, but it's not a priority. He restrained himself from immediately searching for a rock type Pokémon with excellent potential. In this area, the dominant rock type Pokémon were Geodude and Onix, but neither was on Cain's list of preferred Pokémon. Therefore, unless he found one with great potential, he wouldn't consider them. In fact, deep down, Cain harbored a small hope. If Larvitar could hatch, nothing would be better to take advantage of the geocentric cleansing milk than a pseudo-legendary Pokémon. Cain pulled a small egg incubator from his belt. It was something he had prepared in advance for cases like when he found the Beedrill egg. It turned out to be perfect for this Larvitar egg. Although it couldn't hatch now, that didn't mean it couldn't in the future. If he found a way to remove the geocentric cleansing milk fused with the shell without harming the Pokémon inside, or if he weakened the shell, maybe it could hatch. Pokémon eggs can't be stored in storage, so Slowpoke would have a new task from now on, holding the egg incubator with its psychic power. This would also serve as good training for its psychic ability. When Cain returned to the entrance of the crevice, he understood why, despite the abundance of mineral resources in the area, the rocks contained so little energy. This had prevented Geodude from reaching high levels. It turned out that at the heart of this rocky formation, the geocentric cleansing milk had been accumulating, absorbing minerals and nutrients from the surrounding soil and rocks. This also explained why Onix had reached level 30 and why it was always seen basking in that spot. It was the area closest to the geocentric cleansing milk, so the rocks there contained more minerals than elsewhere. Onix had obtained enough energy to grow. Onix had developed the habit of staying there because it found that the rocks in that area accelerated its growth. This might be another example of nature's law of opposites. In extremely cold places, the warmest objects can be found, and in places blessed by light, the greatest darkness can arise. Thus, in a rocky forest with few minerals, geocentric cleansing milk, rich in minerals, had emerged. That's the wonder of nature, and Pokémon are just one part of that wonder. Once we pass through this crevice, we'll reach the location, said Cain, finally recovering from the influence of Tyranitar's motherly love, ready to continue his mission alongside Murkrow and Slowpoke. Although the geocentric cleansing milk had been a great find, he wasn't willing to give up the mission, especially since the reward points were related to his entry into the Shadow Unit. After nearly 5 days of travel, upon passing through the crevice, he finally reached the spot marked on the map as the mission site. Seeing that the mission location was another cave, Cain couldn't help but laugh. Looks like I'm destined to explore every cave on the Trial Island, hey. Though he joked a bit, he wasted no time. After coming this far, he wouldn't abandon the mission over a simple cave. For instance, when Cain and his team entered the cave, the slight noise they made caused a great stir among the Zubat resting on the cave ceiling. Fortunately, Zubat is a poison-type Pokémon, weak to Slowpoke's psychic-type moves. After a quick clean-up thanks to the psychic energy, the cave fell silent, except for the Zubat bodies lying on the ground. Chapter 54, Telepathy. The slippery ground, covered in moss, made every step produce a squeak, and one had to pay close attention to force and angle to avoid falling. Yadin! Suddenly, Slowpoke let out a cry, its eyes lighting up with a blue glow, clearly preparing to attack. Hearing Slowpoke's cry, Cain felt a slight discomfort. Everything was too quiet. This place wasn't like Tyranitar's cave, which was cold and dry, an environment few Pokémon enjoy. This cave was cold and damp, a favorable habitat for many Pokémon. However, as they ventured deeper into the cave, aside from a group of Zubat at the entrance, they hadn't encountered any other Pokémon. Perhaps thanks to Slowpoke's warning, a spherical Pokémon began to slowly appear. A purple gas spread in the air, surrounding a black sphere in the center. Its eyes took up half its body, and below them was a large mouth with two prominent fangs. The Pokémon that appeared was a Ghastly, a ghost and poison-type Pokémon known for its mischievous nature and love of pranks. Slowpoke had detected Ghastly's presence. Being a psychic-type Pokémon, it was naturally sensitive to ghostly energies. When Ghastly appeared to scare them, Slowpoke had already warned them. Caw! Murkrow flapped its wings, dispersing some of the purple gas surrounding Ghastly, positioning itself in front of Cain. As a dark-type Pokémon, Murkrow had a natural advantage against ghost types, so it showed no fear, even when faced with a sudden Ghastly. Kikeek! Ghastly smiled broadly and, with an exaggerated laugh, made a mocking face. Wow, this Ghastly is quite cheeky, Cain remarked with a slight smile. Slowpoke, catch it! It was only a level 16 Ghastly, and its potential wasn't high. It wouldn't be a challenge for Slowpoke. An invisible hand appeared out of nowhere, grabbing Ghastly. Got it! Ghastly was startled. Its body, made entirely of gas, was usually untouchable by other Pokémon, except for its fellow ghosts. However, this invisible force made it feel very uncomfortable, like water meeting fire, causing a sharp pain. Kikeek! Ghastly let out a sharp cry. Kikeek, kikeek, kikeek. As Ghastly's cry intensified, more and more Ghastly began to appear around it, their large eyes glaring at them with hostility. However, the energy emanating from Slowpoke and Murkrow stopped them from attacking. As the number of Ghastly increased, Cain's smile widened. Amazing, it seems we've walked into a ghost nest. Cain wasn't worried about the number of Ghastly. With Psychic-type Slowpoke and Dark-type Murkrow protecting him, plus the move Teleport, his safety was guaranteed. Caw! Yadin! Faced with so many Ghastly, Murkrow and Slowpoke showed no fear, and with a cry, they released their energy. Despite its cute appearance, Slowpoke had an imposing presence when angered, especially in front of Ghost-type Pokémon, against whom it had a natural advantage. The front rows of Ghastly immediately halted, sensing a deadly threat emanating from Murkrow and Slowpoke. Just as both sides were about to clash, an opening appeared in the midst of the Ghastly crowd, and a Ghastly that looked different from the others slowly floated forward. With its arrival, the cries of the other Ghastly began to calm down. Young human, greetings! Suddenly, an old voice echoed in Cain's mind. Hearing the voice in his mind, Cain was slightly surprised. Looking at the Ghastly in front of him, he saw its eyes emitting a soft black glow. Telepathy. Is it you who's speaking? Cain asked, though he already suspected it. The Ghastly nodded, and the old voice echoed again in Cain's mind. Human, your companions are very strong. If we fight, it won't benefit either of us. The old Ghastly spoke fluently, with no difficulties communicating with Cain. Cain nodded, discreetly activating his system to scan this Ghastly's data. Pokémon, Ghastly, yellow. Gender, male. Level, 28. Type, Ghost and Poison. Ability, Levitate. Held item, none. Egg moves, Scary Face, Disable. Basic moves, Mean Look, Curse, Nightshade, Confuse Ray, Sucker Punch, Payback. Learned moves, Astonish, Psy Wave, Smog, Foul Play. Trademark moves, none. Level 28 and still in Ghastly form. Seems like this is an old one refusing to die, Cain thought while reviewing the data. Without showing his thoughts, Cain said, I need to find something inside this cave. Once I have it, I'll leave. Facing such an ancient Pokémon, Cain decided to be straightforward and express his purpose. If you agree to help us with a task, we can let you pass and even help you find what you're looking for. Don't worry, it's a simple task, said the old Ghastly bluntly, proposing his condition. Cain felt tempted. In such a dark place, he didn't know how large the cave was. If he searched on his own, it could take a long time. Without showing any emotion, Cain coldly replied, I'm going in regardless. You can't stop me. The old Ghastly was taken aback, calculating the consequences of a battle with Cain. After a moment of silence, the old voice echoed once more in Cain's mind. We can offer you a substantial reward. As a Ghastly who had lived for nearly 1,000 years, it had dealt with humans before. It knew humans were greedy, but with the right reward, they would do anything. That's not enough. But Cain wasn't playing by the rules. Just when Ghastly was about to reveal his offer, Cain interrupted him, saying it wasn't enough. The old Ghastly felt a tinge of frustration. Noticing Ghastly's expression, Cain smiled and pointed at Slowpoke. Teach it how to use telepathy. Ghastly was surprised. He thought Cain would ask for something outrageous, but instead, he made such a simple request. Telepathy was extremely difficult for most Pokémon to learn, even for him, who had mastered it after centuries of accumulating mental power. However, in this world, Psychic-type Pokémon had a special affinity for mental abilities. As one of the most intelligent species in the Pokémon world, they often possessed telepathic skills comparable to those of humans. Ghastly had already noticed that Cain's Slowpoke was a Psychic-type Pokémon and perceived that its psychic power was considerable, though he couldn't understand why it didn't know telepathy. Chapter 55, Gengar. In fact, Cain had always had this doubt. Given Slowpoke's psychic ability, mastering telepathy should be something easy to achieve. However, Slowpoke had been unable to learn it, and Cain had found no solution. Fortunately, they stumbled upon a Ghastly who knew how to use telepathy, which would allow it to teach Slowpoke how to master this skill. Alright. This time, Ghastly showed no reluctance. Teaching telepathy to a Pokémon that should already know it wasn't complicated, nor was it difficult. After agreeing, Ghastly felt relieved to see that Cain wasn't making more demands. It feared that Cain might ask for something excessive. Even though it thought that if its entire tribe joined forces, they could still defeat Cain and his team, the cost would be too high. Besides, it needed Cain's help with a task they couldn't perform themselves. Gathering its words, Ghastly explained, I have lived here for many years and haven't seen many humans. However, not long ago, someone arrived here. Recalling its vast memory, the old Ghastly continued, that human, was very powerful, much stronger than you. Ghastly looked at Cain, who showed no reaction. At that time, I only dared to observe him from afar, not daring to get close. But I could feel that, in reality, he knew I was there. Speaking about that person's strength, Ghastly couldn't help but tremble. He left an object in the center of our old dwelling and then disappeared. At first, we thought everything was over, but it wasn't. That object began to absorb the ghost-type energy that was here. Taking a deep breath, Ghastly continued, the longer it stayed, the faster it absorbed the energy. Soon, the ghost energy that filled this cave was completely absorbed, and we had to retreat to the outskirts of the cave. Although Ghastly couldn't express many facial emotions, Cain felt its helplessness and asked, why didn't you destroy that object or remove it from there? That's precisely what we want your help to do. We can't get close to that object, but you can, replied Ghastly in a resigned voice that Cain clearly heard. If all of you can't remove it, what makes you think I can? Cain responded. The old Ghastly showed an obviously frustrated expression and, after a moment of silence, said, come with me. When you see it, you'll understand. After saying this, it turned and motioned for Cain to follow. The Ghastly around them began to disperse, leaving enough space for Cain to pass. Although the Ghastly made faces and tried to scare them as they passed, they didn't dare touch Cain. With an impassive expression, Cain followed the old Ghastly, while Murkrow and Slowpoke stayed close, watching the surrounding Ghastly to prevent any suspicious moves. The old Ghastly didn't stop their behavior, as it knew that these gestures were part of the Ghastly's nature and couldn't be corrected. It continued guiding Cain deeper into the cave. The cave was truly complex. In comparison, Tyranitar's cave seemed like child's play. After passing through several forks, turning here and there, they finally arrived at a larger cavern. This cavern wasn't completely dark, some unknown objects emitted a faint glow on the walls and floor. As they got closer, Cain realized they were glowing mosses. The old Ghastly stopped at the entrance to the cavern. With its voice in Cain's mind, the old Ghastly said, this is it. This was our home, but now, due to that object, we don't dare get close. Following the direction indicated by the old Ghastly, Cain saw, under the dim light, that in the center of the cavern was an elevated stone with a pokeball resting on it. Cain was surprised to see it. He had already suspected the identity of the person who had been there, and if he wasn't mistaken, it had to be Umbra, the deputy head of the Team Rocket Shadow unit. With his power and presence, it was no wonder the Ghastly didn't dare approach. But why leave a Pokeball here? Perhaps the mission's objective is this Pokeball, Cain thought. Since the old Ghastly didn't dare approach, Cain decided to move forward on his own. Murkrow and Slowpoke followed closely, always alert to the surroundings, ready to react to anything. Why did Cain trust the old Ghastly's words so much? Part of the reason was that Pokémon tend to be simpler in their thoughts than humans. If they like something, they show it, if they don't, they show that too. They don't tend to hide or disguise their feelings. Although the old Ghastly had learned some human customs due to its long life, it still had the natural habits of a Pokémon, especially when it didn't even realize those habits. Another reason was Cain's confidence in his own power. With Slowpoke and its teleport move, he could quickly escape if necessary. As for the reward promised by the old Ghastly, Cain didn't give it much importance. He didn't expect to find anything valuable in such a desolate place. With this mindset, Cain approached the stone column. When the Pokeball entered the system scan range, it activated. Inside the Pokeball, which bore the Team Rocket emblem, a Pokémon flickered. Pokémon, Gengar, light blue. Gender, male. Level, 48. Type, ghost and poison. Ability, cursed body. Held item, none. Egg moves, scary face, fire punch, astonish, taunt. Basic moves, hypnosis, lick, spite, mean look, curse, nightshade, confuse ray, sucker punch, payback, shadow ball, dream eater, dark pulse. Learned moves, snatch, foul play, giga drain. Trademark moves, rest, protect, sleep talk, toxic, hidden power, water, thunderbolt. Cain was surprised to see this Gengar's characteristics. Is this Umbra's Pokémon? Cain murmured. After seeing Gengar's wide range of moves, he couldn't help but think so. Just the learned and taught moves represented a huge investment of resources. Moreover, with Team Rocket's immense wealth, only Umbra could possess such a Pokémon on the entire island. Since this was a mission assigned by Umbra, Cain was almost certain that this was Umbra's Gengar. With this thought, Cain felt more at ease. As an elite-level trainer, this Gengar clearly wasn't part of Umbra's main team, probably just part of his second team. In Team Rocket's ranking, light blue is considered an elite quality. Among trainers, a Pokémon with elite qualities is already considered exceptional. Chapter 56, The Mysterious Stone Pillar. A Pokémon's innate quality varies, and this translates into different talents. While it may not be evident at lower levels, as they level up, these differences become clearer. A Pokémon with high innate quality is superior in all aspects, learning, battling, and synchronization with its trainer, compared to a Pokémon of lower quality. In essence, a Pokémon's innate quality almost always determines its maximum potential. Returning to the main point, if this Gengar was placed here, then what Ghastly said makes sense. Since it was stationed in this spot, it has been absorbing the ghost-type energy that inhabits the area. This was likely the main reason Umbra left Gengar here. Ghastly mentioned that this cave was originally brimming with ghost-type energy, enough to sustain the entire colony. Even some Ghastly with good innate quality could evolve into Haunter. However, since Gengar's arrival, the energy in the cave began to decrease drastically. So much so that even those who had already evolved into Haunter reverted back to their former Ghastly form, which is extremely harmful to a Pokémon. Gengar, being the final evolutionary stage of Ghastly and Haunter, naturally exerts great pressure on them. And moreover, this isn't just any Gengar, with such high innate quality, the Ghastly, most of whom are of red quality, stand no chance of resisting its influence. To avoid being absorbed by Gengar, the Ghastly were forced to move to the outer areas of the cave. Even though the energy is much scarcer there, it's still something. Cain carefully picked up the Pokeball marked with the R from his belt. The Pokeball's switch was already locked, obviously to prevent Gengar from coming out on its own and absorbing the surrounding energy. As soon as he lifted the Pokeball, a thread of black mist began to float from the base of the pillar. Is this such dense ghost-type energy? Cain observed the mist with curiosity. As if confirming what Cain had said, the black mist was instantly absorbed by the Pokeball. Through the partially visible parts of the Pokeball, Gengar could be seen comfortably resting inside while absorbing the ghost-type energy. In Cain's system data, there was a small but noticeable improvement in Gengar's attributes, though it wasn't very significant. Did Umbra leave Gengar here to increase its level? Or perhaps to heal some injury? These were the only reasons Cain could imagine for Umbra leaving Gengar in this place. He didn't believe Umbra had left Gengar there just to test it. However, this wasn't something Cain needed to consider. His mission was simply to take the Pokeball back. Now, Cain wondered if he should try digging around the stone pillar to see what was producing such dense ghost-type energy. But after thinking it over, he decided not to. First, because this place wasn't like Tyranitar's cave, where there were no other Pokémon to oppose his actions. The Ghastly at the entrance were carefully watching Cain, worried that he might do something to affect their home. If Cain tried to remove the pillar, the first to oppose him would be the Ghastly. This pillar was their main source of sustenance. If it were destroyed, many Ghastly would die, and those who survived would lose any chance of growth. Additionally, Cain suspected that if Umbra, an elite-level trainer, hadn't touched the pillar, there was surely a good reason for it. If a trainer of his level had decided not to act, Cain also thought it best not to get involved. In the end, Cain decided to leave the pillar alone, hoping that perhaps in the future he could return and discover more. He placed Gengar's Pokeball back on his belt. Seeing Cain put away the Pokeball, the Ghastly, who had been holding back, slowly approached, deeply inhaling the ghost-type energy that had begun to disperse into the air. This restored some of their vitality. Meanwhile, Slowpoke, who had been by Cain's side the entire time, frowned. Since Cain had picked up Gengar's Pokeball and the energy began to expand, Slowpoke had felt uncomfortable, as if it were being enveloped by an increasing heat that was slowly melting it. "Thank you, young human," said the old Ghastly sincerely. Cain noticed Slowpoke's discomfort and suggested they continue the conversation outside. The old Ghastly also noticed Slowpoke's unease and followed them to the exit. Once outside, Slowpoke finally relaxed, leaving behind the oppressive sensation it had experienced inside the cave. "Young human, now that you've fulfilled what we asked of you, tell me, what is it that you're looking for?" asked the old Ghastly, with a somewhat anxious tone. Cain had a curious expression. At first, he didn't know that the old Ghastly's request coincided with what he had already intended to do. But now that he had completed the task, the old Ghastly was asking him what he was seeking. "Well, have you seen any stone about the size of a palm that contains a great amount of energy? It doesn't matter what type of energy, whether fire, water, electric, anything will do," Cain said after thinking about it. He decided to take advantage of the situation and ask for something else. Chapter 57, Dusk Stone. To be honest, Cain didn't really want to take advantage of the Ghastly. After all, although they appeared cunning and terrifying, after a brief period of interaction, he discovered that Ghastly were not very different from other Pokémon. They were also a simple and honest species, although their appearance might not seem so benevolent. What Cain mentioned was, in fact, the Evolution Stone. Whether or not the Ghastly had seen it before, he was only going to mention it once. Being able to obtain the mission item smoothly and teach Slowpoke the telepathy skill had already fulfilled his goal. What surprised Cain was that after he finished speaking, the old Ghastly, with a strange expression, pulled out 2 black stones from a corner of the cave, floated over to Cain, and said, Are you talking about these stones?" Cain watched as the Ghastly used gases to form 2 virtual hands in the air, holding 2 black stones in its gaseous hand, stones known as Dusk Stones. Cain couldn't help but be speechless. He had only spoken without much intention, and didn't expect the Ghastly to actually pull out evolution stones, much less 2 at once. The first to react upon seeing the 2 dusk stones in the Ghastly's hands was Murkrow, who made a slight sound and then tugged on Cain's pant leg with its claw. Murkrow stared at the 2 dusk stones, and though it didn't know why, a deep desire arose within, telling it that it must obtain those 2 strange stones. Those stones could make it much stronger, to the point where it would experience a qualitative change. Although it didn't know why it had that thought, Murkrow tugged at Cain's pant leg again, signaling that it needed those stones. Cain looked at Murkrow, knelt down, and gently stroked its feathers, softly saying, "Murkrow, I know, but don't rush. It's not time for you to use these stones yet." Hearing Cain's voice, Murkrow also calmed down. Although the thought persisted in its mind, it knew Cain wouldn't hurt it. All it had to do was follow Cain's instructions. Cain also understood why Murkrow was so excited. It was a kind of instinct in its blood. With the Dusk Stone, it could evolve into Honchkrow, and its power would increase tremendously. But according to Cain's plan, Murkrow was still far from meeting the conditions necessary for evolution. Evolving now would be a total waste of its exceptional talent and potential. Originally, Cain had no intention of coveting the Ghastly's evolution stones, but he didn't expect the old Ghastly to be so direct. He barely mentioned the stones, and Ghastly actually pulled out 2 dusk stones. Oh, right. Cain had a small idea and quietly activated the system in his mind. The quality of the 2 dusk stones was scanned and revealed. Dusk stone, mid-level, a magical stone that allows specific Pokémon to evolve. It is black as night and can slightly enhance the Pokémon's potential. Dusk stone, initial level, a magical stone that allows specific Pokémon to evolve. It is black as night. It enables the Pokémon to evolve, but does not optimize its potential. As I thought, just like in my past life, even evolution stones have different qualities that affect their effects. A mid-level evolution stone can slightly enhance a Pokémon's potential. If Murkrow uses a mid-level evolution stone, its potential might increase even more after evolving. Reaching dark green quality wouldn't be impossible. Cain reflected silently. So what if it were a higher level evolution stone? Cain couldn't help but think of the possibility. Although the chances of finding a high-level evolution stone were very low, Murkrow wasn't at the point where it needed to evolve yet. It could wait, right? Without rejecting the offer, Cain silently stowed the 2 evolution stones into his Team Rocket belt and said, "Thank you. It's only fair. You help us, and we help you. Besides, these 2 stones are of no use to us. We only kept them because they contain too much power, otherwise, we wouldn't have found what you were looking for so quickly." The old Ghastly explained. Cain nodded slightly. In fact, dusk stones are only effective for Pokémon that need an evolution stone to evolve, and they serve no special purpose for the Ghastly. After finishing, the old Ghastly's eyes filled with dark energy. A visible gas began to spread from its body toward Slowpoke. Caw! Seeing what the old Ghastly was doing, Murkrow was alarmed and prepared to attack. After all, Slowpoke was its companion, and Murkrow wouldn't allow anyone to hurt it. Cain raised a hand to stop the tense Murkrow, who was ready to attack, and observed the old Ghastly, narrowing his eyes. Although he didn't know what Ghastly was doing, he suspected it had to do with telepathy, and besides, Slowpoke wasn't showing any signs of resistance. They didn't have to wait long. The dark gas disappeared from Slowpoke's body and slowly returned to Ghastly. "All done, I've taught him telepathy." The old Ghastly's voice echoed in Cain's mind again. Just as he had suspected, it was teaching Slowpoke how to use telepathy. His talent is very high, he just needed a guide. The old Ghastly continued, "I can sense great power within him, but he hasn't fully mastered it. You'll need to guide him well, human." Cain nodded. He knew Slowpoke had immense talent, but didn't expect it hadn't yet reached its limit. "Master." Suddenly, a voice like that of a child appeared in Cain's mind. Cain looked at Slowpoke in surprise, whose eyes emitted a faint blue glow. Evidently, that was its voice. "Is that you, Slowpoke?" Cain asked. Slowpoke nodded, but didn't use telepathy again. It seemed it wasn't yet used to the ability, and being naturally shy, wasn't very talkative. Cain patted Slowpoke's soft pale pink head and smiled encouragingly, saying, "Don't worry, we'll take it slow. You'll learn how to use it eventually." Slowpoke's voice echoed again. Judging by human standards, Slowpoke was probably like an adorable child. Murkrow also heard Slowpoke's voice in its mind. As Pokémon, they didn't need mental communication, but it found it quite interesting. Murkrow flew around Slowpoke a few times, curious that its companion had learned such a fun ability, making Slowpoke feel a little embarrassed. Telepathy is a very special ability. It doesn't mean you can learn another species' language, but rather it's a form of mental communication. The voice you hear is just a mental simulation, not actual verbal communication. With that, Cain's journey was nearly complete. He was very satisfied with the results, the most valuable being the acquisition of the Larvitar egg. Although it was said that it couldn't hatch, as long as the egg wasn't dead, there must be a way to hatch it, he just needed to find it. The second major achievement was obtaining the 10 bottles of geocentric cleansing milk, which were an enormous fortune. If elite trainers knew about it, they might be tempted to act. After that, the 2 dusk stones were an unexpected reward. Chapter 58, Reward, Ghastly. Following the old Ghastly, Cain and his team slowly walked out of the cave, which was as complex as a labyrinth. The ghastly they encountered along the way no longer looked at them with hostility, on the contrary, there seemed to be a sense of familiarity. Even Slowpoke began to feel sympathy for them. Upon reaching the entrance of a new cave, the old ghastly stopped. Inside, there were many ghastly gathered together. Cain looked at the old ghastly curiously. By now, they should be guiding them out of the cave, but instead, they had been led to another area. However, it didn't seem like the ghastly were going to attack them, as there was no need to. If they did try, the ghastly surely knew it would be a fight ending in losses for both sides. Before Cain could ask, the old ghastly spoke, "I mentioned before that if you helped us with something, we would give you a reward." Saying this, it floated further inside, gesturing for Cain and his team to follow. As they entered, the ghastly in the cave curiously watched them, gradually surrounding them. Seeing the ghastly's behavior, Cain frowned. Although he didn't know what the old ghastly was planning, being surrounded as if they were animals on display made him feel a bit uncomfortable. "Here are all our companions willing to join you. You can choose one of them to become your Pokémon," the old ghastly finally said, revealing what the reward was. Cain was left speechless. It turned out the reward the old ghastly had mentioned for completing the task was letting Cain choose a ghastly. For the old ghastly, allowing Cain to take a ghastly was beneficial for both parties. When the old ghastly was young, it had ventured into the human world and had been a companion to a person. However, at that time, human living conditions were difficult, and due to many lurking crises, that person didn't survive long, dying in an accident. Afterward, the old ghastly returned to the place where it was born. For the old ghastly, who had visited the human world, humans were not a mystery. In those days, humans and Pokémon helped each other, and that's how they managed to survive under harsh living conditions. Typically, wild Pokémon that received help from humans grew at an astonishing rate, much faster than they would have on their own in the wild. The old ghastly knew that while life here was carefree, it also meant there wouldn't be any special growth. It was difficult for any ghastly to become particularly strong, and even evolving into Haunter was a challenge, let alone reaching Gengar. Allowing a ghastly to follow a human was an idea the old ghastly had had since seeing the Gengar that ruled over the area where they lived. Then Cain arrived, and since Cain left a good impression on him, the old ghastly decided to let Cain choose a ghastly as his Pokémon. The ghastly present had been curious when they saw Cain and his team, as it was the first time they had seen a human. These ghastly were relatively young and had grown up hearing the old ghastly's stories, so upon hearing about the human world, they felt a certain fascination. Seeing a human for the first time, their curiosity was hard to contain. Cain's heart was filled with mixed feelings. He never imagined, nor did it even cross his mind, that the old ghastly would allow him to choose a ghastly as his Pokémon. Ghastly was a Pokémon that Cain had always liked, both when he played video games on Earth and in his previous life as a member of Team Rocket. Although it was a ghost and not particularly pretty, that didn't diminish Cain's enthusiasm for Ghastly, or more precisely, for its final evolved form, Gengar. First, Gengar has very high base stat values in special attack and speed, which perfectly aligns with Cain's growth direction and battle style requirements. Additionally, Gengar is a ghost and poison type Pokémon with a highly versatile battle style. Often, with the right strategy, it's possible to defeat stronger opponents. The most important thing is that Gengar is a Pokémon capable of Mega Evolving. Upon Mega Evolving, it becomes a special attack cannon, with terrifying output power. For now, Slowpoke is the main one responsible for Cain's personal security, but when he enters the human world, there will be places where openly carrying Pokémon won't be allowed. In the event of a surprise attack, there might not even be time to throw a Pokeball. However, if Cain had a Ghastly, it could hide in his shadow and always be ready to protect him, capable of facing any unexpected situation. When the old Ghastly mentioned that Cain could choose a Ghastly, it was as if he had read Cain's mind. Ever since he entered this cave and encountered the Ghastly, Cain had been tempted to capture one with good potential for his team. But as more and more Ghastly appeared, Cain suppressed the idea, as capturing one and leaving the cave without issue would be extremely difficult. Moreover, a Ghastly captured under such circumstances would be very difficult to train and might even become uncontrollable. However, the old Ghastly's reward hit the mark, and Cain decided that if among all those Ghastly there was one with the potential he was looking for, he would capture it and take it with him. Of course, if there wasn't a Ghastly that met his requirements, he'd rather not take one at all, as he didn't want to waste resources training a mediocre Pokémon. Cain follows an elite training philosophy, and his standards for Pokémon are high. Since his resources are not abundant, he prefers to train fewer Pokémon but ensure each one is capable of performing excellently. Even so, Cain felt he was taking advantage of the Ghastly, and seeing them so happy made him feel a little uncomfortable, the first time since his rebirth that a Pokémon had made him feel this way. Cain nodded toward the old Ghastly, who returned his nod with a curious look. For others, selecting a Pokémon with good potential from hundreds of Ghastly might be extremely difficult, but for Cain, who had a system, it was nothing more than scanning several times. As his eyes scanned the place, multiple data screens appeared before him. Most of the Ghastly had red potential, some orange, and only one or two had pale yellow, all with lower potential than the old Ghastly. Cain's frown deepened. If all the Ghastly in this community had this level of potential, it wasn't worth capturing one to train, as it would be a waste of resources. Seeing Cain frown, the old Ghastly asked, "What's wrong? Haven't you found a suitable one?" With so many Ghastly there, the fact that Cain hadn't found one that interested him surprised the old Ghastly a bit, though that wasn't the whole group, it represented nearly half. Chapter 59, Ghastly's Capture. Upon hearing this, Cain nodded, not wanting to insist further. He was about to turn around and leave with Murkrow and Slowpoke, as he wasn't really forcing the situation, so he didn't feel any disappointment. There was no Ghastly here that met his requirements, but he knew he would find one somewhere else eventually. Seeing Cain's actions, the old Ghastly hesitated for a moment, then seemed to make a firm decision and approached one of the nearby Ghastly, speaking a few words to it. "Wait a moment, there are a few more that haven't arrived yet," said the old Ghastly, stopping Cain, who was about to leave. Cain was surprised but nodded. After waiting for a moment, a Ghastly arrived with a few other Ghastly into the cave. Seeing the new Ghastly arrive, Cain's eyes lit up. Just by looking at them superficially, he could already tell they were different from the previous ones. First, their attitude was more lively, their eyes had more brightness, the purple gas surrounding them was denser, and their smiles couldn't hide their enthusiasm. A spark flashed in Cain's eyes, and the system began showing him the information about these Ghastly. Yellow, yellow, dark yellow, yellow, light green, dark green, Cain murmured in his mind as each data card appeared for the Ghastly, becoming more and more surprised until he finally saw the card for the last Ghastly, which turned out to be dark green. Pokémon, Ghastly, dark green. Gender, male. Level, 10. Type, Ghost and Poison. Ability, Levitate. Held item, none. Egg moves, Fire Punch, Scary Face, Haze. Basic moves, Hypnosis, Lick, Spite, Mean Look. Learned moves, Rest, Shadow Ball, Psychic, Skill Swap, Snore. Trademark moves, none. The old Ghastly, seeing that Cain had fixed his gaze on a specific Ghastly, sighed and said, "It seems you can judge the quality of Pokémon. This Ghastly is the most talented in our tribe and has been our main focus for training. Originally, we wanted it to grow here and become the tribe's leader when I'm no longer around." Cain was surprised, not because the old Ghastly could see that he could evaluate Pokémon, but because of what he said about this Ghastly. Although its level wasn't very high, it had learned many advanced moves, which was the result of extraordinary talent and dedicated training. The Ghastly Cain had been watching also noticed his gaze and curiously looked him in the eyes. It was the first time it had seen a human. It had a great desire to explore the human world that the old leader often spoke about. When it learned that a human had arrived in their territory, it was excited and wanted to meet him immediately. But the old leader had stopped it at first, though for some unknown reason, they finally brought it here, and it was able to see the human it had longed to meet. "It's decided, it'll be him. I believe he has great potential." With that, Cain approached the highest quality Ghastly without hesitation. The old Ghastly smiled sadly but didn't stop him. Since he had decided to allow these exceptional Ghastly to be presented, he knew he wouldn't interfere with Cain's choice. He just didn't expect Cain to have such a good eye and pick the most talented one right away. "Very well," said the old Ghastly with resignation, though he felt his heart break. Cain walked up to the Ghastly and smiled, asking, "Would you like to come with me and explore the vast and colorful outside world?" Kikik kikik. Hearing Cain's proposal, the Ghastly was momentarily stunned. It looked at the leader, and seeing no opposition, it nodded excitedly. Cain smiled even more widely. He took a super ball from his Team Rocket belt and said to Ghastly, "If you agree, enter here." Murkrow and Slowpoke were also watching the Ghastly, excited. They knew they would soon have a new companion, which made them genuinely happy. Under everyone's watchful eyes, the Ghastly slowly approached the super ball Cain held, gently touched the button in the center, and was absorbed in a beam of red light. Click! With a crisp sound, Ghastly was captured without offering any resistance. Cain smiled with satisfaction. It was a pleasant surprise to be able to capture such a high-quality Ghastly, which had clearly been trained with great care. He was more than pleased. At the same time, a weight was lifted from his shoulders. From now on, he wouldn't have to worry so much about being ambushed. The old Ghastly watched nostalgically as the most talented Ghastly in their tribe was captured by Cain. Though it pained him, he had already made the decision and wouldn't change it for the sake of the tribe, even though there was no turning back now. Cain released the newly captured Ghastly and said, "Welcome to the team. Ghastly, I hope we can work well together." Craw! Yadan yadan! Murkrow and Slowpoke also joined in the welcome with smiles. Kakeek! The Ghastly, who seemed very active and energetic, began circling around Cain, Murkrow and Slowpoke, clearly happy with its new situation. Though it seemed younger than Murkrow and Slowpoke, its attitude was more immature, which made Cain smile. Perhaps this would add some energy to the team in the future. The old Ghastly sighed in resignation, though he tried to maintain a facade of magnanimity, while enduring the pain in his heart. Seeing how happy Ghastly was gave him a bit of relief. After capturing Ghastly, the old Ghastly finally led Cain and his Pokémon toward the entrance of the cold, damp cave. Seeing the sunlight again, feeling its warmth on his skin, brought a deep sense of relief. After all, anyone who spends a long time in a damp, dark underground world, surrounded by ghosts, would feel uncomfortable. Cain stretched, hearing his joints crack, and prepared to say goodbye to the old Ghastly. When he looked back, he saw that the old Ghastly had stayed far inside the cave, avoiding the sunlight. Though it wasn't afraid of the light, as a ghost, it clearly didn't like it. Ghastly also seemed uncomfortable with the sun, though it showed no signs of physical discomfort. "Ghastly, you'd better hide in my shadow for now," Cain said with a smile. Though he had just captured it, Cain already fully trusted Ghastly. Ghastly nodded, knowing the shadow was much more comfortable than being in the sun. Besides, after living in a cave, there wasn't much difference between being in a shadow, though it was smaller, but for him, that was enough. Cain didn't put Ghastly in a Pokeball, considering that one of its main functions would be to protect him at all times. So he decided it was better for Ghastly to get used to it from the start. He gave a small wave to the old Ghastly, signaling that he was leaving. After all, he planned to return sooner or later. The mysterious stone pillar in the cave alone was enough reason to come back. Besides, now that he was taking Ghastly with him, he would surely return one day to show off his achievements. That day, he would surprise everyone. Chapter 60, The Divine Move, Teleport. As Cain and the others walked away, the old Ghastly remained at the entrance of the cave for a long time. In the end, as if sighing, he returned to the cave alone, his silhouette reflecting an inexplicable melancholy. Shortly after, in a place where the old Ghastly couldn't see them, Cain and his team were standing under a tree, all looking at Slowpoke. Cain gently patted Slowpoke's back and, with a smile, said, "Slowpoke, use teleport to take us back. Don't push yourself too hard, go as far as you can and conserve your energy." That's right, Cain had no intention of retracing their steps. It was at least a 3-day journey back to the Team Rocket base from here, something they couldn't cover all at once. Luckily, Cain had already accounted for Slowpoke's use of teleport, or he wouldn't have been so calm and relaxed while training as they advanced. There's no doubt that teleport is a god-tier move for survival in the wild. Slowpoke's telepathy was not yet fully developed, so he didn't say anything, just nodded slightly, enveloping Cain and the others in his psychic power, even covering Ghastly, who was in Cain's shadow, with his energy. Ghastly began to take form in Cain's shadow, curiosity in his eyes. It was the first time he'd been pulled directly out of a shadow. Ignoring Ghastly's curious gaze, Slowpoke focused on locking in the coordinates. Teleporting so many beings over a long distance all at once was quite a burden for him at this point. As his psychic power intensified, Slowpoke's eyes shone brighter. With a flash of his energy, the entire group disappeared from the spot. Apart from a single leaf that slowly fell, there was no trace left of Cain and his companions. Boom! In a part of the forest on Test Island, Cain and his team suddenly appeared, having just arrived via teleport. Ugh! Cain shook his head slightly, the sudden shift in space left him a little dizzy, though his resilience had greatly improved. However, for Pokémon like Murkrow and Ghastly, it had no effect at all. Plop! With a light thud, Slowpoke, a bit exhausted, couldn't maintain his floating position and fell to the ground, showing signs of fatigue. Luckily, Cain had warned him at the start, so it wasn't severe, just mental exhaustion. Slowpoke, start meditating, meaning, use calm mind. Recover since you've pushed yourself quite a bit. Cain was serious. Although he wasn't entirely sure where they were, seeing how tired Slowpoke was, they must be very far from the Ghastly cave. Slowpoke nodded, using the last of his psychic power to return the egg incubator to Cain before lying down on the ground. A mysterious psychic wave enveloped him as he began to meditate. Without worrying about their location or potential dangers, Slowpoke started meditating, trusting his trainer. Murkrow, Ghastly, keep watch over the area. If anything approaches, attack immediately, Cain ordered firmly. Caw! Kakeek! Murkrow and Ghastly nodded, fully aware of the importance of their teammates' safety. Even Ghastly, who had just joined, was putting in his best effort on watch duty. Ghastly, go scout around using the shadows. Don't engage in fights, just check for any powerful Pokémon, Cain told Ghastly. Not knowing where they were, sending Ghastly to scout was a necessary measure. Hee. Ghastly nodded. Although he was very curious about the outside world, he knew that the safety of his teammates was the most important thing right now. He slowly disappeared into the shadows of the trees, going to explore. In a forest filled with shadows, he had the freedom to move as he pleased. Meanwhile, Cain sat down next to Slowpoke, unconcerned about the dirt on the ground, and examined the incubator he held. Inside was the Larvitar egg. The incubator's indicators showed everything was in perfect condition, with some values even above average, but the hatching time was still unknown. Now, with the incubator technology confirming that the Larvitar egg wasn't ready to hatch, Cain felt a bit frustrated. How can I get you to hatch? It's such a headache, Cain muttered to the egg in his hand. Time passed quickly, and when the sun started to set, Ghastly returned. Using the forms created by his gas, Ghastly communicated to Cain the information about the Pokémon and special areas he had found. With Ghastly's description, Cain finally understood where they were. So, we're already in Scyther territory. No wonder Slowpoke is so exhausted, Cain thought. They were actually on the outskirts of Scyther territory. Just a little further and they would have left the territory of these Pokémon. It wasn't surprising they hadn't encountered any powerful Pokémon in all that time. The Scyther, known for their love of combat, were rarely challenged by other Pokémon, because regardless of the outcome, another Scyther would always appear to fight. If they won, a stronger Scyther would challenge them. If they lost, a weaker one would come to fight them, until they were completely worn out. This constant battle frenzy would make any wild Pokémon tremble just thinking about it. However, for Cain, this meant he could relax. If Scyther was the strongest Pokémon in the area, he was confident enough to leave without much trouble. Moreover, the base wasn't far. If they hurried, they could reach it in a day. Of course, if Slowpoke used teleport again after resting, they would get there even faster. Finally, when the sun was just brushing the tops of the trees, Slowpoke recovered. Although each use of teleport drained much of his psychic energy, the benefits were huge. For example, the first time he used it, he could only teleport a few kilometers before exhausting himself, but this time he had covered more than 100 kilometers, a growth nearly tenfold. The most important thing was that this time, after using teleport, he still had energy left to deal with any unexpected situations. Of course, he wouldn't always grow so dramatically, but his understanding of the move teleport had definitely improved considerably. When Slowpoke opened his eyes again, the brightness and vitality in them made it clear that he had gained a lot this time. Slowpoke, how do you feel now? Cain was the first to notice Slowpoke's recovery, and seeing his renewed energy, he felt relieved.
Thanks for listening.